extremely well in the car and is very fired up to try to prove that he deserves more than a couple of drives a year. Then we get towards the front row of the grid. There's Tony Longhurst, who's been in 2-litre racing this year and, of course, won the championship for the Benson and Hedges racing team. The field look too for the big V8s booming from behind, trying to barge and bash and force their way through as they get underway now in this Sandown 500. It's a great start for Wayne Gardner. He's soaring through and he's up in the 5th place in a race being led, though, by M.Skaife. Off pole position and raising cement dust as he covers the first corner well and ensures that Peter Brock, who was on pole position, who's now back to 3rd, can do no better than that. And that's a great jump and a start for M.Skaife. As you can see further back, the field wending its way through in the BMW M3 of Neville Crichton, already losing an enormous number of places as the big V8s storm by. And look at M.Skaife storming away ahead of the rest of the field.
Jones did very well to come through from the 2nd row there. Very aggressive push through the centre between Brock and Skaife, but long distance race, it doesn't matter. They're settled now. Clean run, which is great. And
Skaife has a lead of 0.97 of a second up the start of the back straight over Brock. Nearly a second gain in about 4 corners. Jones, at least. So, look at this. Look at the pressure being put on by the two leading teams in touring car racing in terms of results. That's correct to say. And
the second of the Works Holden cars have run into the back of somebody, and obviously under brakes.
And so now across the start-finish line, 138.8 kilometres an hour average for M.Skaife from a standing lap as they start storming through in the order of Skaife in car 2, from Jones in car number 30, Mazira in car 05 and Gardner in car 4. Then it's Longhurst in 25, Perkins in 11. He's come through well as into the pits goes the second Holden race team car number 15 that started from 5th grid position, Brad Jones. Behind Longhurst is Perkins, as I said, then P.Morris, G.Seton in 1, Win Percy in 7, D.Johnson in 17, he's up to 10th place. Gary Walden in the Mazda was still 11th at the end of the first lap as they storm now over the top, down the back straight towards Dandenong Road corner. And this is a motor race between the leading two, as you can see. Alan Jones, Mr. Aggression, out after M.Skaife, Mr. Talent, Mr. Inform of Australian touring car racing this year, in the team that works harder than anybody, reputed to have the biggest budget, but they say no, we haven't. 2 others have bigger budgets than we just work harder. And indeed, late yesterday in the final untimed non-qualifying session, it was they who were the ones that were out there still, while most others had packed their cars away in the garage, but streams of spray coming up from the car as they kept working at it.
We talked about a 500-kilometre sprint. They're certainly starting out that way. Skaife's on the limit under brakes, the car's weaving about under that condition, and Jones is in there pushing him.
So Alan Jones in 30, Brad Jones, of course, the driver of car 15 that had that pit stop early on in the race and has therefore dropped a long way back. Very bad luck for Holden Racing Team.
It's interesting.
Out now.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's interesting to watch the exhaust on the 2 Winfield cars. They're running their cars very rich on fuel. You can see the black smoke under acceleration and a big lift-off flame from both of them. Interesting setting.
That's an interesting clump of cars too, my goodness. Really close together. The leading pair now being joined by Brock in the 05 car. So not far away. Then it's Larry Perkins heading the next bunch. He's in 4th place. So from being 10th in the morning warm-up, Larry Perkins is very definitely in good shape.
The man who's in the best position, I think, is Brock. He's in clear air. He's in 3rd position. He's allowing these 2 hard chargers ahead of him to push and shove. He's got much more experience than either of them in long-distance racing and sitting pretty at this stage.
M.Skaife and Alan Jones. Single-seater and Larry Perkins. And look at the speed on the Speedo. Up over the top there at over 200, still doing 100 miles an hour. And now coming down to Dandenong Road corner. Look at him, still exceeding the speed limit over 100 kilometres an hour. An awesome sight and sound from inside the Peter Jackson car. Really is awesome. You just can't realise that they go so fast at places like that. Would make people car sick, probably in a straight line. For most people, you can do everything there, Howard, but smell the fumes.
Which is great. That sort of noise really gives you an opportunity to understand how clever these boys are to be able to do that, and sometimes even talk on television as well.
1.6 seconds back to third place from the race leader here. M.Skaife battling with Alan Jones. And in the order behind, it's Larry Perkins leading the next bunch with Wayne Gardner in car 4 behind him. He's in 5th. Tony Longhurst 6th in 25. P.Morris 7th, the Diet Coke car. And we looked at him from G.Seton's car number 1 just a moment ago when we got in the car with him. D.Johnson's 9th in 17th. Win Percy is 10th in car number 7.
And isn't it remarkable, after only 4 laps, they're already lapping the back markers. This is going to be part of the race strategy that's going to come in. We mentioned it earlier on. These boys are racing as hard as they can, but there are going to, unfortunately, be touches, spins and pushes. And we are going to see cars coming out here under pace lap conditions. So, I mean, that sort of lock-up from a car that's going to do 500 kilometres of racing just gives you some idea of how keen all of these people are to get in and get at one another.
Murray Carter, the man, though, finding their way around, and G.Seton was the man who raised it at the driver meeting this morning, and he was enormously concerned. He said there is an 80 kilometre an hour difference between our top speed and theirs, and our speed coming into a lot of corners, and he said, we can't stop. We just can't stop to avoid them. If somebody pulls the wrong rein, we'll hit them. Brock is falling back from the leading pair because it's 1.57 seconds between him and second placed Alan Jones, going up to about 1 3/4 seconds from the race leader to Brock, the man that was the fastest qualifier from the man now leading the race, M.Skaife, in number 2. Alan Jones, all about pressure.
These two are circulating in 1:15.1, and Brock slipped back to 1:15.6. So I think Brock is letting them go. He feels the pace is a bit too high at this very early stage in the race, and he's always a man to watch on long-distance races.
Gary Walden in the Mazda, now slipping to 21st place as the field sorts itself out. And Stephen Richards in the Porsche immediately behind, leading the production, well, second in the production car section of the race, but 22nd outright. But back behind the leading in top 10 is Alan Grice, Bob Jones, Greg Crick, Kevin Waldock, Smurden, Trimble, Watson, Youlden. And so all the quick boys have sorted themselves out from those aberrant grid positions and into the top 10 as this battle continues to wage. And it really is a fascinating one. Brock still third. Perkins is very close to him. Gardner's not far away, nor Tony Longhurst or Dick Johnson. So there's some very good quality and plenty of pressure. G.Seton goes into 8th place in car 1. P.Morris 9th in 23. Win Percy 10th in 7. Don't know what that does for your head. That's why racing cars race and road cars go on the road. Could you cop that lack of sound deadening and all that noise, vibration and harshness? So wonder they have a separate department for it in engineering and motor manufacturers. There are the top 6. And Larry Perkins, the man that we were just sharing the ride with in car number 11. He's in 4th. So a really interesting race to me at this stage as they come up now to lap Gary Walden. He's in 21st place, so that gives you some idea of how they're going in the production car. It's not so far behind. You saw Stephen Richards there being lapped too by the leading mob as they come storming through. No better people to let somebody by, and you'll see the Mazda stay to the outside his normal exit line and let the leading contenders come through, getting tighter in on him. He'll try and stay, I suspect, on the right-hand side of the track. Look at the distance they've pulled. Look, in a matter of only 500 or so metres, they've pulled more than 100. The leading stormtroopers as they come up over the top now. M.Skaife, well and truly racing at what he thinks is his comfortable maximum, and Alan Jones putting on every bit of pressure that he can find to try and force M.Skaife into error or overusing the machinery.
and they're pushing one another. The lap time's coming down. They're now running up to 1 minute 14.9, both of them. Brock's now come down to 1:15.1 that they were running previously, so he's decided that he doesn't want Larry any closer to him than he is. Interesting to see the lock of the brakes every time Skaife goes through there. They're not scared about bumping these cars over the grid on the outside edges of all the corners. The cars are tough. They know their cars very well indeed, and they just are pushing themselves and one another into as much trouble as they can.
Alan Jones flashes by 0.82 of a second now from M.Skaife, and from saying that he was putting on all the pressure he could comfortably muster, it's the opposite now. Skaife, I think, just starting to pull tenths on him. Little but valuable tenths of a second to mount up to 0.82, and it's still there. They're just travelling slowly there, so the physical distance between them comes back. And you'll see it lengthen as they go up the straight, as they build up speed. Look how close Perkins is to Brock, and then Wayne Gardner, and then look at this battle too. D.Johnson heading that next little trio. The man who, for all 5 pole positions that he's had here, has never managed to win this race. And behind him, Tony Longhurst, and then G.Seton. Boy, that's hot, close company. And P.Morris. D.Johnson sending out, in fact, J.Bowe to start in the car, because he said, well, Bowe was trying to sort it out. He said, it doesn't make any difference to my rate of pay. But he said, I don't know if Dick didn't want to sort us out from the grid position we were on. He said, I'd love to have done the middle stint, just watch the pattern form and see whether Dick makes any mistakes at what I've got to do to respond. Whereas now, he said, it's all in my hands. And there you see a production car, Murray Carter, who's been lapped by them twice now. And they've done only 9. They really will be fed up. For all that we like to see those cars there in as much variety as possible, they will have had more than enough of the production cars, probably by now, certainly by race end. It'll be interesting, and we'll no doubt see it many times, to see the speed differential as they storm up the back straight and go past some of the production cars. Skaife just drives it to the outside of the track to hook up to widen the entry to that left-hander there. And Alan Jones, forgetting that 0.82 of a second that he was behind, has linked it back up as they come to Jan Lammers in the Volvo. Another of the production cars, and remember that unlike the Mazda RX-7 or the Porsche 968 or the BMW M3, which is a pretty purpose-built little sporty sedan, this is a full luxury sedan with walnut dashboard. And here, notice the difference. Mr. Marsden, as an engineer, you were pleased to note that.
Yes, indeed, immediately. And Jan, you can see Jan is spending almost more time with his eyes in the mirror than he is driving the car. International professional, does not want to get involved in any accidents or any problems. And this is how people have to race. How difficult to get the most out of your car and still have to use your eyes the way that poor Jan is at the moment.
That's just a tremendous impression of both him keeping out of the way and off his line, now saying I can get over here to get this corner right, and seeing him working at the wheel, but how quickly the other cars go by, and even when they're offline, they just stream away. And he says, I'm staying over here, boys. The left's the go for your life. And look at him, trafficators on. Hasn't adjusted the radio, but the walnut dashboard's in fine fettle. And a man who's driven here in a very, very hot Le Mans type sports car, Porsche, but also in the TWR Racing Jaguars. And now in a very different vehicle today, a very plush saloon, competing in the production car section.
Just interesting to watch Jan, this international Dutchman with wonderful English and an international opportunity to go anywhere, to come down to this country to drive a car like this with Kent Youlden, who's a good, fun Australian. They got on extremely well together. Their times are just about together. They sorted the car out together. Lovely to see that these sorts of things can happen. I
hope that he got a discount on his airfare. He only weighs 58 kilos. They should have given him at least another big suitcase. So, with M.Skaife still being hounded by Alan Jones down in the pits, John Smales.
And, well, it would appear that the Alan Jones fuel problem might be ongoing. The Peter Brock car has reported to his pits that he's sliding all over the track on fuel that's being dropped by Jones in front. Rob Benson from HRT has been to the officials. They said they've looked at it but they say other cars are dropping fuel early in the race as well, so they're not going to do anything about Jones's fuel problem. Brock is adamant that he's losing time and distance, and it's dangerous because of the fuel that Jones is dropping.
Too good a race to let it go with M.Skaife, as you can see. Jones couldn't be closer, despite the fact of them charging their way through. And in fact, it's not just despite that, but to some extent because of it. Because it generally disadvantages the front runner. Not always, but generally that's the case. So in very close company, the leading pair, followed by Brock with about a 1 second buffer to Perkins. Very close company is Larry Perkins. You'll see him come in here in a moment. Larry Perkins with the Dick Johnson car, and that's J.Bowe at the helm of it. And Larry is heading what's becoming a fairly furious little battle behind, and that's Wayne Gardner with J.Bowe at 17. Don't forget that this touring car master of building them, of developing them, of sorting out sensible rules for them, was in 1976 in the BRM Formula One team. A man of enormous driving and engineering talent. Threaded through there, Danny Bogut and the other slow car very well indeed. And drove and engineered his car to Bathurst victory last year. Of course, he'd done it 3 times previously with Brock, as he's done this race. To victory with Brock too. Brock's last victory here was 1984, 3 years further back than his last Bathurst victory. And there's the man of whom we speak in 05, 3rd place. And 3.76 seconds in arrears to the leader. 1 second back to Perkins on the official count. 4.84 from Perkins to the race leader. 7.4 to Dick Johnson. And 0.26 of a second only to Wayne Gardner when they went across the start-finish line last time. Going backwards 1 place, Gardner into 6th. The J.Bowe car, Dick Johnson, into 5th place. And that's hard-earned success from 15th grid position for J.Bowe in 17. There he is, now 5th place. He's on a charge. Look at him. Got Gardner out after Perkins. Again, we say Alan Jones is a hard man and a pressure man. And G.Seton went off in car number 1. So, G.Seton again, the just deposed Australian touring car champion, who has such wretched luck, Howard Marsden, in long-distance races. And I often find it sort of, oh boy, that was big trouble down there as well. Braking for the corner and a really big lock-up as the line was taken. Have a look at Bowe here. And wow.
And there's nobody else around him. He seems to have gone off on his own.
So, as I say, 6-speed gearbox, but G.Seton, one's reluctant to talk of luck as he discusses it now with his pit crew, the boss, the owner, the man in charge of the finances of the Peter Jackson team. An enormous responsibility for the young man who has had an awful season. And one has to say that he's made too many mistakes. In a sport that demands great accuracy, G.Seton pressing on now, but with a tyre rubbing and a problem that can only get worse.
That's right. One of the criticisms of the front aerofoils of the Falcons is that they are vulnerable to taking damage, and that's exactly what's happened to young Glenn now. Coming in on the tyre shouldn't give him too much of a problem, so long as it's not giving a knife-edge cut to the outer corner of the rubber. He'll be talking with it with his pits. They'll be watching it on television. They'll see it, keep an eye on it, as will the officials. In the meantime, Glenn will keep pushing.
And he's in 11th place at this stage. He's just completed his 15th lap as of the race leaders. So he's on the same lap still as the race leaders, but he has a tyre rubbing occasionally. and he's now behind. Skaife in the lead from Alan Jones, Peter Brock, Larry Perkins, J.Bowe, Wayne Gardner, Tony Longhurst, P.Morris, Win Percy and Alan Grice, the top 10, then G.Seton.
The rub on that front right-hand tyre wheel, in fact, is halfway up the guard, which is a bad place for it to be. If it was just the lower area, which is a lot softer in material, it wouldn't matter so much, but that can be quite a concern for the team.
It's the sort of thing that makes you sick at heart. You're trying to organise the team. You want all the pit crew to work perfectly. You want your co-driver, your other cars drivers to work perfectly, and you make the error.
And the balance of the car will now be hurt because the downforce that you get from the front of this aerodynamic package is enough to bring him in. They're going for a new part, they go for new tyres, they'll talk with Glenn, they might refuel, and they certainly should even this early so that he can pick up some time from another stop at another time. Sure there's no more damage. One of the problems is cooling to the brakes. If they've destroyed the duct that carries the cooling to the outside front right-hand brake, which is the brake that takes the most wear and damage, that would be a concern to the team over the long time.
11th when he was racing, when he'd resumed racing after that off, and now obviously falling way back further. And again, the difficulty of essentially the team manager being the man in the car. So he's doing two things now. He should be sitting there as a driver thinking, right, what will I do when I get back out? Aha. So now there's the problem. And we've said, you know, Glenn's made mistakes this year and he has had rotten problem. At the moment, he can't stop the car. It's not working properly. The brakes aren't anywhere near up to the mark as P.Radisich, the man that won that touring car challenge at Monza last year. It's had a bit of a wretched time in the touring car championship in Britain this year, but still one of the really fast men. And this is the situation at Sandown, in the Sandown 500, with the race still being led by M.Skaife, 17 laps completed, 0.37 of a second, in front of Alan Jones, followed by Peter Brock, Larry Perkins and D.Johnson in 5th.
We trust you.
Well, what a situation we have here now. The race lead has just changed at the end of, or the start of the 22nd lap. Alan Jones has gone through into the lead in car 30 to thunderous applause from the grandstand. He's taken it from M.Skaife. So 22 laps completed and we have a new race leader. We also have a new third place. Look at him, J.Bowe. J.Bowe forced his way through on Peter Brock on the 20th lap, 24 minutes of racing. So 2.5 minutes ago. And there he is on the thrust, and there's a big off. And that's Gardner. I think that's Gardner in car 4, it is. So Wayne Gardner's gone off down where G.Seton said he couldn't stop. And he's given it a harder and perhaps more serious smack. What probably saved G.Seton was that he hit very squarely along the side of the car. But Gardner here, have a look. He's got everything locked up and on his own, whoomper on the left side of it. So he spun right round and hit the left side. G.Seton hit driver's side.
And that will have got to his suspension, so he's going to have to come in to get the front end of the car realigned and reorganized. Gardner
was in 7th place at that stage in car number 4. And Alan Jones is pulling away. Skaife is now under threat from J.Bowe. So suddenly the race is coming alight. Two of the leading contenders have had problems, and problems that undoubtedly will unsettle the car and induce greater tyre wear or less good lap times, probably through a couple of causes and certainly extra pit stops. And now we're seeing J.Bowe in a real hurry. He's come from 15th grid position in car number 17, a car that's traditionally qualified very well here for D.Johnson, but never met with success. They were 15 laps from victory not so many years ago and ended up having a couple of problems and ended up in 5th place. But now they're presenting a very real threat. They want their way past M.Skaife and they particularly want to get out there with Alan Jones, the man in the real rush, at the head of the field, completing 22 laps now. Sorry, completing his 23rd, and with a lead of 1.5 seconds as J.Bowe is second. So it's Falcons 1, Falcons 2, Commodore 3, Brock 4th, Perkins 5th, Commodore, Longhurst 6th, Commodore, Morris 7th, Commodore, Win Percy 8th, Alan Grice 9th, and Bob Jones, at least, in car 12, 10th. And there, the Wayne Gardner car.
You're having to look at that front suspension to see how bad the damage is, whether the brake ducts have gone again, as we mentioned with the previous car. They've made a decision, wheels back on again. They should be refueling the car and get it back out there.
A 15.02 for Alan Jones on the last lap. M.Skaife a 15.3, a 15.24 for Bowe in Dick Johnson's car 17 as Gardner comes back out again in car number 4. So wretched luck for a man in that Coca-Cola team like G.Seton, the boss of his team, but he's got Alan Heafy back in the pits and very much organising the team, working out the strategy and giving him all the insight from years and years of touring car and long-distance racing experience to line up with the tremendous talent of Wayne Gardner, the 1987 500cc Grand Prix World Motorcycle Champion. Car not working. Going slowly, pulling offline, and I would think back to the pits, but we'll see. The production car category at the moment being led by Walden Bond, car number 70, 22nd position outright from Stephen Richards. Immediately behind them on the track, 23rd, the Crichton Mark Brame BMW M3, which will go quicker when young Mark Brame gets into it, but he's in 3rd place in the class. Then it's Carling in the 2nd Mazda RX-7, as we see the front end of the field now, and Larry Perkins there, 5th place in car number 11. Oh, look. Skaife saying, come on, if you've gone past me, keep going, don't hold me up.
Because look in my mirror.
Yes, look in his mirror indeed. Peter Brock.
Brock's times have dropped now. He's into the 14 seconds regularly, and the time, in fact, where they were settling into 15-second laps, they've now come down into the 14s, the more aggressive of the drivers. Over
the three of them, 7/10 of a second. Gardner back to the pits. Danny Bogut parked on the inside of the corner at the end of the straight. You might have seen a brief flash in the Mazda 626, but big problems for car number 4.
They don't know what they're looking for. They're having to pull wheels and they'll check and they have to make a decision. Alan Heafy will have to earn his money down there by feeding information back to Gardner about the decision on the car.
So already for these people, for Alan Jones leading the race, J.Bowe in 2nd place, Skaife in 3rd, and they're harrying him. Peter Brock in 4th, Larry Perkins in 5th. Good news for them. Wayne Gardner's in trouble in car number 4. G.Seton's been off. All that coming through to them from their pits and saying, OK, 2 more that aren't any longer possible contenders.
Right now at lap 25, we're actually halfway through the first of our about 50-lap races. We said the race at 161 total laps is going to get divided into 3 equal lots of about 50 to 55 laps. Now at 25 laps, they're still at one another very hard indeed. We've got to go the same distance again, another 25 laps before we get to the pits.
And car number 4 is down in 21st place, the Wayne Gardner, Neil Crompton Coca-Cola car. There you see the top 6 at the moment. And boy, they're racing long and hard. And don't forget Tony Longhurst back there in car number 25. He's not featured in anything. He stayed out of it. Haven't seen him lock a wheel. Haven't seen him get into any dices. Hasn't had the front of his grille covered by a car immediately in front. Just keeping it going well. And indeed in Oran Park, the last round of the Touring Car Championship, very quick there. Finally came unstuck in qualifying a little bit, but has a car that can travel as quickly as any of them. A car, incidentally, built and bought from built by and bought from Larry Perkins.
One of the problems for the front runners now is they're starting to come up on the 2nd rank of the Commodores and Falcons, which are virtually as fast as they are between the corners, but not as quick through the corners. And it's very difficult for the heroes to get past the 2nd rank big cars.
Well, that's what we're seeing now. We've got a mix of slow V8s. They can really jump, though, when their operators get them pointed straight. But their corner speed will be low, and there's off.
That was Brock, I think.
Yes. So forced right onto the grass. He's still there. He's not far behind the car we're in. There you see him, storming Peter. Cool as a cucumber early in the race. Suddenly now, different work at hand. Second gear. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. I think I'm one ahead of myself.
Yeah, I hope number 7 doesn't come up.
Yeah, one it took as a change. It was just a bang under the car, but pretty good stuff. Three or four second gear corners for them. If you did that in the production in a road car and you heard that little crunch every time, Howard Marsden, you'd be worried, but they're a totally different type of gearbox.
Yes, on the road-going gearbox, you've got what is known as synchromesh to help you changing through the gears, and you don't have to match the engine and the road speed revs to get the gear through. These boys have got straight-cut gears, and they just push through with these very hard, short shifts. They do a little bit of a flip on the throttle, and they get through from that viewpoint. So it's metal to metal all the way, and that's the clonk and bang you can hear.
And tough, tough as anything, those gearboxes. Trimble, Larry Perkins round the outside of him.
The language will be running blue in that car.
As Larry passes another of his customers, he built 7 new cars this year for customers. He's got 3 new ones coming. Don't forget that by the beginning of the touring car season next year, we will be seeing VR Commodores race and EF Falcons. This is the second or third last race, probably, for these configuration motor cars, because despite what was originally said about the touring cars not being at the Adelaide Australian Grand Prix, they almost certainly will be. Dr. Mal Hemmeling told me on Friday when they had the Grand Prix announcement down here in Melbourne. It's nearly signed and sealed. As we come back and have a look at Alan Jones with who's on him, the man who was 15th grid position, who is now second in the race, and I'll have a little wager he's about to lead. J.Bowe. Fantastic, hard-charging job done in 17 as we have our third race leader in the Sandown 500. As they complete 29 laps, they go out on their 30th. And Falcon battles Falcon as Alan Jones wants him back. There's the bearded boy on the right, the new race leader. And his team owner and manager, D.Johnson, will be standing there saying the car's in very good hands.
It would look as though the Johnson cars have got more power than the G.Seton cars. They are able to come through on both the front and the rear straights.
Dick Johnson said to me this morning, he said, in the dry, our cars are working fantastically. He said, really, we're very happy. He said, don't worry about the grid position. He said, if it's a dry day, and it looks like being, it's grey and overcast, and the mist that I expected to clear to a beautiful blue sky never did that. The sun gamely tried to peek through, but quite a ceiling of cloud all over, but I doubt that it'll rain through the day. But one never knows, and the forecast does suggest otherwise. And if it does, Ian Campbell down in the pits won't enjoy it.
No, I don't think I will. Will at this stage in time, it's still perfect conditions for racing here at the moment. At the group, at the production park, excuse me, end of the pits, we've had the Silas Wayne entry in. They've had exhaust problems in that car and also found an extra fan problem, so they've got the car back on the track. But the interesting comment comes from the crew chief from the Lammers car, the Volvo. I asked him what the problem was in the last turn coming in the main straight. He gritted his teeth and said he's just being a little too polite. However, we're hearing strong rumours now they're having turbo problems in the Triple M machine. Back to central commentary.
Well, bad luck if they are, because it's a car that we saw from the James Hardy 12 has enormous potential, and you must remember it's a four-door luxury sedan, not one of the little low sports coupes like the 968 or the RX-7. As we see J.Bowe not only leading the race, but the only man to storm away from Alan Jones so far, Howard Marsden.
Yes, quite right. Just one thing for the viewers. You're seeing the lumps starting to be kicked up from the outside of the cars. Each one of these corners will get more and more black because the rubber that's being rolled off the centre of these large slick tyres pulls together and gets into this sort of offline problem. You must stay in the center of your racing line. If you come offline, you get onto those lumps of rubber, you throw some out. They're very slidey, and it's one of the danger areas, because when you have to come offline to get past a slow car, it really is a danger area. Something's going to get more and more part of this race as we go on.
That fastest lap of the day that was shown up there on John Bowe, just over the 1:14, well, he's just done a 14.85 on lap 31. Now, the car's admittedly lighter on fuel, but it's well down on tyres, and he's within, in other words, 0.8 of a second of the fastest lap done on the day by anybody, and the person that's done the fastest lap is he. So it's been a tremendous effort, and he's still driving it very, very quickly, and it says an enormous amount about the speed and the ability and the hard-charging coolness of John Bowe. We've talked of Alan Jones and of Brock and of Skaife and so on. Don't anybody underestimate the bearded little wonder in that car, because on his day he's as quick and as good as anybody. And don't forget, he's been an Australian both driving champion in single-seaters but also sports car champion. He can handle the fastest of machinery with the same sort of aplomb as we've seen him in this Falcon today.
Coming back to that tyre wear problem where they're running the rubber off the tyres, this first session of 50 to 55 laps is going to be the one that's going to be hardest on the rubber. Some of them may have to come in a little bit early because the cars may in fact lose too much of the tread that's available to them. But in the second session and third session, coming towards the end of the race, tyre wear in fact will slacken off because the rubber's on the road and their grip is not as high, and therefore the wear is not as high.
He's pulling a second a lap on Alan Jones. He's now 2 seconds away from him, as you can see there. 1.97 from first place Bowe to second placed Alan Jones. And that was across the start-finishing line on the last lap, just 2 laps since he took the race lead. So he really is in an enormous hurry. And I suspect, Howard Marsden, like your thoughts, that M.Skaife in 3rd place in car 2, Larry Perkins 4th place in car 11, might be a little bit worried by the pace of John Bowe in 17.
They've certainly decided that it's too fast for them. They are capable of doing these times, but at the moment they said this is too much on the car. We're going for the longer distance race, and that's where the test distance is changing. And
heading that way, heading to the pits at about 20 laps. But with news down there at the moment, John Smales.
And Wayne Gardner has just stormed back into the motor race after losing 8 minutes and 19 seconds while his crew struggled to find what was wrong with the front suspension. What happened? His wheel actually hit the ripple strip with such force that it punched a circlip straight out of the suspension, and it took all this time to find it. So 8 minutes and 19 seconds lost by Gardner. Incidentally, there have now been 3 spoilers changed in this race. Brad Jones took 1 minute and 24 seconds. Both Gardner and Seton took 1 minute and 33 seconds each.
And Wayne Gardner in 28th place at this stage in car number 4. Glenn Seton in 17th place in car number 1. The sort of fate that's befallen the 2 people who came unstuck just a little bit further on from here. This was Wayne Gardner territory where he locked and spun and whacked the fence. And it was a tad further on that Glenn Seton just drove on, locked up, sideways into the fence too.
Gardner should be quite quick now because he'll be angry with what has happened. He's lost time, and it'll now be used as a test session with this particular race, and he'll push himself and his car as hard as he can to learn as much for the next race, which of course is Bathurst. But
John Bowe, 15.07 his last lap. Wayne Gardner at 20.5. So 4.8 seconds away from the gun time at this stage. But you're quite right. There's nothing now to be done other than to drive it and see if you can break it, and if you can't, what you can recover to. That's their only purpose in life from here on. Neil Crompton will be pretty disappointed in the pits. Have a look there. Not a man doing a 120.5.
Exactly right. That was the first lap out, but this time lock up, cock it over, get that wheel up in the air and really get into it. The man is angry.
And in car 33 is a fair bit of trouble for David Sala, Steve Swain, the Holden Commodore VP. Recovered, and of course one of the production cars. Nothing like the aerodynamic kit or the power or the tyres or the brakes or anything else of the storming Group A Commodores and Falcons. Just its ride height alone gives it away, apart from all the external appearance.
You can see now how Gardner's coming up and having a push at the Bowe-Johnson car. Exactly what we said. He's just going to go flat from here on.
G.Seton doing 15.8, 15.8.2. His last lap in car 1. In other words, he's lapping, well, I was going to say third or fourth fastest, but there are a few. There's Johnson and Jones and M.Skaife faster than he, lapping at the moment. Mazira, Longhurst and Morris, but he's lapping faster than Grice in 8th place, faster than Percy. Sorry, Percy in 8th place, Grice in 9th place, Bob Jones in 10th, and Wayne Gardner 28th, a 15.4. 15.4 Wayne Gardner. Well, Alan Jones has just done a 15.27 and a 15.12 to P.Morris. Boy, oh boy. Car 23 in 7th place is really flying. Gardner has just done 4th fastest lap time done on the last lap.
Yes, and remember, of course, he's on fresh tyres now, and so he does have a bit of an edge over the boys who've done their 30-odd laps on their tyres.
G.Seton, by comparison with that Gardner time of 15, now he's done a 15.4. Seton more in the area of 15.8.
Yes, now, Seton had that brake problem earlier on that put him off. What that might be is, in fact, there are a number of problems. They can have the balance front to rear if their braking effort is incorrectly set. They can have pads that are not working properly. They can have glazing on the discs. They can have cooling that's not coming up properly. There are all sorts of permutations of problems. So they haven't been able to fix it other than to get Glenn out there and push through and see if he can't drive over the top of that problem.
One of the well-driven cars in the race will be that Mazda there. Gary Walden and also Colin Bond with him. And then the Falcon Tyres Mazda X, the Mazda Racing Team, car number 61. In good hands, Keith Carling, sports sedan specialist, and Kevin Burton, a production car specialist, normally running in a Falcon. But this car, Gary Walden really knows how to get round quickly. What'll be ruining a lot of his time is him having to get out of the way. He stays to the outside of the track. Follow your line. They know you would normally go there, so go there normally, and let the people following find their way around. P.Morris, another off, and was in 7th place when it happened.
It's a problem.
And P.Morris was pulling off the track, and yeah, Kevin Waldock
had to go round him.
And well seen and evaded and recovered by Waldock, and Morris for that matter too. Saw it late, but saw it fast enough, and Gardner, unfortunately for all those lap times, seems to feel that either the thing's not right or that there's no profit in the day, and certainly plenty of money to be saved by putting it away at this stage, because he knows that in the engine and the driveline he'll do a lot of wear and tear pre-Bathurst if he keeps going.
So this is the Larry Brock fight that's continuing on.
Wait for the lift. Here he can get on hard to the power again. Wait for it. There it comes.
Notice how Brock was quicker into the corners and Larry's quicker off the corners.
And watch for it on the straight. When's he get on the nail? Yes, Brock did a lot of good work around there. Made a lot of ground on L.P. Perkins in 4th, Brock in 5th.
Not a lot of difference in total power, remembering Larry's coming off the corners quicker than is Peter, so Peter is possibly a little bit more powerful and able to hang on to him.
12.2 seconds from Perkins forward to the race leader. 12.56, so 0.34 of a second for Brock, looming up onto the back of the Castrol car. Castrol being chased by Mobile. Racing now for 48.5 minutes in the Sandown 500 as Peter Brock, the man on pole position, surges past Larry Perkins and says, 4th place, thank you. Teammates to 3 Bathurst victories, also victory here in 1984. A fallout, gone their separate ways. fairly similar Australians in many ways. Both fairly down-to-earth sort of guys, relate with ordinary people. No real pretension at all. But Brock at the moment leading Perkins. And pulling away quite quickly. To the tune of a 1 second gap since he got by. So 13.5 seconds back to Larry Perkins in 5th place. From the race leader, still J.Bowe in car 17. From Alan Jones in car 30, M.Skaife in car 2, the best of the Commodores, being led by 2 Falcons. Peter Brock in 4th place, Commodore. 5th place, Larry Perkins, Commodore. 6th place, Longhurst. 7th place, Win Percy, that he'll share with Russell Ingle, the Australian Formula Ford and now Formula 3 single-seater, and Formula Opel star over in Britain. He really goes extremely well. Alan Grice is 8th. Bob Jones is 9th in the Ampol car 12. And Greg Crick, Tony Scott. Don't forget them. 2 of the lesser runners in terms of glamour in the field and certainly in terms of budget, but in 10th place at this stage. And then it's Trimble, and G.Seton is now up to 16th place as we come to Longhurst. In car number 25, 6th place.
But his times aren't good. He's travelling in the high 1 minute 16s, low 1 minute 17s, whereas the Johnson car and the Jones car are doing high 114s or 115. So there is a gap starting to appear just in the regular lap times between the first 4 cars and the rest.
Well, Bowe must have them really worried. He's just done a 14.81 again, and that really is honking. Alan Jones, by comparison, 15.34, 0.53 of a second in a lap, and on lap 40 as well. So Bowe is the star of the race at this stage. M.Skaife, a 15.06. And Perkins out into the 16s, and down in the pits, Ian Campbell.
The unenviable title of the day goes to Brett Yulton. He's the first one behind the pit wall. Brett, what's the problem?
Well, yeah, I'm especially disappointed to hear that. First one behind pit wall. We've got a bit of a problem with the tail shaft. Look, it's only, it's obviously going to slow us down somewhat, but, you know, really this race is a learning exercise for Bathurst. These cars do have a bit of a weak link in the tail shaft, and we're going to get it fixed, and we'll get Malcolm out there to get some valuable experience for Bathurst.
Back up to central commentary.
Well, Brett Yulton not enjoying his transition. There's Kent and Brett competing in the race. Kent is partnering Jan Lammers in the Volvo, but Brett is in one of the hot cars, and as you heard, tail shaft problems, as brother Kent in the Volvo motors by. And again, all you hear is the whisper of the turbo. Once it was all you heard in a good silent car was the ticking of a clock, but you don't hear that these days. But in this Volvo, the 5-cylinder transverse engine car, the Triple M backed car, front wheel drive, where you hear the whining and the banging of the gearbox in the Group A cars. You just hear the nice little whistle of a turbo boosting in a whole pile of fuel, and the little 58-kilogram Dutchman, Jan Lammers, who's been in Formula One, who's been in World Championship sports cars, who's won at Le Mans, who's competed here in sports cars, a gentleman and a total professional, doing a tremendous job. Look at him, very neat and efficient. Good lines, just working it a little bit, sliding it out a little bit, but making sure that the natural understeer characteristic of the car is not excessive. And down in the pits is John Smales.
And regrettably, vying with Brett Yulton for the honour of being, or the dishonour of being the first behind the barrier, is Wayne Gardner. Wayne, you're very disappointed.
Yeah, very disappointed myself. I think I was fumbling around on the back straight trying to get a drink because it's very hot in the car, and I arrived at the corner, went to grab a gear and grabbed the wrong gear, and spun and hit the fence and broke the front steering arm.
You went for 4th, but got 2nd.
Yeah, I went to go back a gear lower. It was a traffic cone, but I made a mistake and poked the wrong gear and spun and slid sideways and crunched into the Armco. There's no body damage, but it broke a front steering arm, and then we were 9 laps down, and I went back out, but the car's not steering quite right, so it's a little dangerous to keep continuing.
Well, Wayne Gardner, you're certainly building up to Bathurst a strange way.
Yeah, the cars are very good. The team was fantastic today and all weekend. I'm just very disappointed in myself, you know, for making such a silly mistake. It shouldn't have happened, and I'm going to be very hard on myself from now on.
Well, good on you for taking it on the chin anyway, Wayne. We look forward to seeing you at the mountain.
Thank you.
That's something you won't hear a lot of today, of drivers saying, I made a mistake. There are all sorts of things. All this broken, it only cost 20 cents and all this sort of stuff. Very few people will front the cameras and say, I made a mistake and I'm disappointed and I'm not going to do it again. And, you know, I'm going to be harder on myself. Good on you, Wayne Gardner. Good gutsy stuff. Brett Youlden in car 31, in fact, that was 17th fastest in the warm-up this morning. One of the VL Group A Commodores that with Wayne Gardner went out pretty early in the race. As we look at Trimble in car number 47. And P.Morris you saw pull off earlier. Well, he's faded down to 22nd place in the field. And as we sort out some of these cars coming out of the race, and we can list those for you too in very impressive form with our marvellous computer scoring system here. And at some stage we'll give you a run through of the cars that are out of the race. Not a lot of them officially listed at this stage, but there's the Wayne Gardner car number 4 and the Brett Youlden car number 31, and P.Morris has pulled off in car number 23, and Trimble gone down the bottom there. And what you were saying about marbles on the outside of the track, Howard Marsden.
Exactly right, and he deserved that. He did not move over. He didn't make it easy for wind to come through until too late. Onto the marbles, off and gone. No damage, just a little bit of a lesson. The Win Percy car is going very nicely, doing 16.5s regularly. Good to see.
Win Percy right up on Trimble there, and he's got everything locked up, and he's in the wrong section of track, and he had no hope. And he was off not so much to the Daily Planet as to the next planet, into the pits too.
Bad for the heart, but let's go into the pits and fix the heart.
John Trimble, a character, he's got his own plane.
And he obviously has caught his pit crew on the hop. That wasn't a scheduled pit stop, so maybe he really did want to get out of the car.
Yes, he has his own plane and his own business. And he's a learning man in touring car racing, and he knows that. And he's just trying to pull it together as well as he can. Now 15.32 for J.Bowe, who's been superbly impressive in this FAI Shell car for the D.Johnson team. Ahead of Brad Jones by 5.7 seconds now. 45 laps completed, anything up to 10 before he does his first and scheduled pit stop. M.Skaife is 7.66 seconds behind, so a further 2 seconds behind Alan Jones, and Skaife back in 3rd place. And I think Skaife and Fred Gibson would be a bit surprised by the pace. Well, they'll be surprised if the car keeps going.
That's exactly right. They've obviously made their decisions. They know what they want to do, and they're just running their own race from this position. The cars are now on lap 45, and we see them stopping, we believe, between laps 50 and 55. So within the next 5 to 10 laps, all the front-running cars are going to be into the pits. This time it should be just fuel, just tyres, and just the driver, and straight back out again on new tyres and with a new driver. That will unsettle the front-running group and may change everything. As I say, watch for this between 5 and 10 laps.
And G.Seton's 2 cars in close company there, but in very different situations in the race. With Alan Jones in car 30, as you can see, 5.7 seconds behind the race leader, J.Bowe, fellow Falcon runner. And in car number 1 in 15th place is G.Seton, 2 laps down, and the 5.7 seconds forward, 2 laps and say 6 seconds behind the race leader, and not in the situation G.Seton in car 1, as you can see by the fact that cars 1 and 2 in the field have gone by, to pull back even one of those 2 laps at this stage and to get on to 1 lap behind and a minute 15 to make up before you get onto the same lap as the leaders. It's a gigantic task.
Mind you, very early in the race we're going to see a lot more surprises yet, and young Glenn staying with it could come up into quite a reasonable position, but still not happy with things. The car's going reasonably well. He can hang on to the back of Alan Jones, so maybe he's learned to live with his brake problem.
And here comes the man that he sparred with through the season and handed his touring car title over to, and that's M.Skaife coming through. So have a look at the current placings at this stage. There they are with 6.7 seconds back to second place, 8.97 back to third place, and as you can see further down in the field, the situation that doesn't include G.Seton until we get down there to 12th, 15th place, and that takes us through to 18th. And come aboard. G.Seton. Do you wonder, Howard, when you see him talking like that, whether he's doing too much, whether he's thinking as much about the team's strategy and how the other car's going and so on, as about trying to get car one as far forward as possible?
Yes, that is interesting. He's also got a fair amount of understeer on that car. He took a lot of lock on that particular corner. He's basically not happy with the car or with himself, and I think he's just going to have to keep motoring as well as he can. It
was a very hard smack he gave it. If he'd hit it any other angle, but fairly flush along the side of the car, he could well have bent a corner so much that he wouldn't have been able to continue. But look at him catching Alan Jones, man second in the race. And it is critical that he really tries to stay as close to these people, because as you say, there's no question of a driver of the calibre of G.Seton to be backed up by P.Radisich in a car as well prepared as these Peter Jackson cars are, that he's not going to pull forward a lot of placings in the race. And Gary Walden there in the Mazda, very much the master of the situation. With the Porsche 968, Stephen Richards just in front of it on the track, and in fact leading at 19th and 20th outright. They are 7 laps down on the leaders in 48 laps completed, so every 7 laps they're being lapped. But the production car category class, a massive lock-up for Alan Jones there. The production car category being led by the Porsche 968 CS of Stephen Richards, ahead of Gary Walden in the Mazda RX-7. Here in second place and 15th place are the 2 G.Seton team cars. And as I said before, the man that took the title from the man in car number 1, G.Seton, handed it over to N.Skaife, of Australian Touring Car Champion, a title that was first raced for in 1960 on streets on the outskirts of Orange called the Nublar Circuit, which I drove to after the Bathurst meeting to see the race, and won by David Mackay in the Jaguar. But now the deposed Australian Touring Car Champion, less than half the age of the first Australian Touring Car Champion, David Mackay, must now be well in his 60s, and back in Australia after quite some years sojourning in Europe. And Skaife saying, "Excuse me, Glenn, I'd like to come by, but I'm not going to risk tucking my nose in there, albeit that you're in 15th place. Glenn won't be giving away that much. Skaife wants to get by, he's welcome, but he's got to get a tad closer than that." He's not welcome to go by, but he's allowed to go by. Jones, as he hooks up to come along the straight now, is more than 8 seconds in arrears to J.Bowe, and it just highlights again the sort of work Bowe's been doing. Now 50 laps completed, a 15.84, a 15.64 for Alan Jones, just on the laps just completed, a 16.06 for Skaife, a 15.09 for Brock, a 15.1 for Peter Brock. So something to do with traffic, of course, and indeed there we see that on this lap, with the faster lap time that we just gave you, that the gap between the leader and second place has diminished down to 8 seconds. But nevertheless, a a very hard-earned 8 seconds, particularly considering that he came from 15th place, as this dice is very much on between G.Seton in 15th, but in car 1, and trying to stay with the leaders and probably to motivate himself up to the same sort of pace as much as anything else, and to say to M.Skaife, listen, mate, I want to stay here because of my position, but I also want to protect my second-place teammate in the race, Alan Jones.
Now, they've just completed 50 laps on the 51st now. The tyres will be getting tired. You know that there's a battle that goes on, not only Falcon against Commodore, but also the Yokohama, Bridgestone and Dunlop battle.
And the Shell team car that just came out of the pits was car 18, as we can clearly see, and just had their first pit stop, as is often the case. They bring the second car in first, see how it's gone on fuel and get it out of the way. And car 18 is in 13th place now, Alan Grice.
And young Steve
Johnson, indeed.
So yeah, that's quite a usual thing. We'll pull the second car in, settle down the pit crew, have a look at the cars, have a look at the tyre wear, decide whether they're going to stay on the same compound for the leading car. Lots of good information comes out of doing it that particular way. But you must start now to expect all of the front-running cars into the pits over the next 2 or 3 laps, and it'll be interesting to see who comes out first and who can maintain their position.
Peter Brock tucked in tightly there, in 4th place still, 13.8 seconds behind the race leader. Sounds a lot, and it's a nice little margin for the race leader J.Bowe to have, but in the reality of a 500-kilometre race at Sandown, that right to the very end of it has often seen all sorts of weird and untoward problems emerge. It doesn't count for an enormous amount. It's worth something, but it doesn't count for an enormous amount. And if this were the tail end of the race, you'd see that 13 seconds being attacked by such as G.Seton and by M.Skaife and by Peter Brock, and there'd be a chase on that wouldn't be resolved until they got to the finishing line. But at the moment, they're settling in. They know they're heading, as Howard Marsden was saying, they're heading for their first pit stop fairly soon. It's a matter really of having established these placings, settle the car down now, don't sort of overwork it, get it in and get some new equipment onto it, tyres and refuel, drivers in, and then we'll start another arguing and sorting out process in the second of what will be 3 stages of the race.
Exactly, 54 to 55 lap races, and let's go and talk to Ian in the pits.
Alan Grice has just done the quick changeover with Steve Johnson down here in the number 18 car. We'll be talking to him shortly. They did have a slight hiccup on one side, changing over pads. It's been a complete service, but they're very, very happy at the moment. So the second of the Johnson car is due in about 1 lap's time.
And the one that was in came back out in 13th place, and you can see them tentatively just checking brakes. Stephen Johnson has been doing a grand job in very limited amount of travel in these big threatening cars, which certainly have 550 horsepower. Talking to Charlie O'Brien in a taxi from the airport on Thursday, he said, I reckon they might have around 590 myself. And he said they're rev limited, of course, to 7,500 revs. Allegations, always suspicions from other teams whenever a team goes fast, that some haven't had their rev limiter working. And his car, for instance, his NASCAR, by going to 8,500 revs on carburetors, has 714 horsepower. So if a car were able to get another 500 revs, it would do 2 things. It'd pick up some top-end power, but it'd pull them back when they come down in the gear change to a much stronger section of the band, of the power band. And as we see in the pits now, car number 17, the race leader till this moment, J.Bowe handing over to Dick Johnson. What a grand job done by J.Bowe, settling now the team chief into the car, with Bowe to do a double stint.
The fuel's in, the drivers are changed, and they've gone for a pad change. I'm very surprised about that. Obviously, they got information off their second car that they have got a problem with their brakes. Now they're actually having to push back the calipers so they can get the pads out, put new ones in. This is going to cost them very badly, because I know some of the other teams are not expecting to have to make their change until the second of the runs, the second of the pit stops. If they've had to change this quickly, they've got 2 more lots of 50-plus races to do, and they may well have to do another pad change if they keep this sort of pressure up.
This circuit much more sensitive or harder on brake pads, on transmissions, drive lines, but also on tyres. And we'll talk about the tyre battle shortly.
The important thing here is we've seen J.Bowe really push this car much harder, nearly 2 to 3 tenths of a second faster than everybody else. Has everybody else been smarter in looking after their brakes better than that car?
And now second place car that inherited the race lead. Alan Jones into the pits. He slipped automatically to second place. M.Skaife is the new race leader in car number 2, so that the order is Skaife from Jones, from Brock in third place, 05. Perkins is fourth in 11, yet to pit obviously. And then as they come by the pits, it's Skaife from Perkins, from Alan Jones, from Brock, Longhurst, Percy, D.Johnson, Bob Jones, Brad Jones in 9th place, and Longhurst now is third in car number 25.
They've got the passenger door open. They're doing something in there with the inside of the car. I'm not sure what's going on. It's a bad problem. They've got to stay like that. They're getting waved out by the driver.
And Brock has gone to fourth, so he must be in the pits too, because Tony Longhurst is ahead of him in car number 25. So real flood of the race leaders. Skaife from Perkins from Longhurst now, 2 from 11 from 25. Brock in fourth place, but we check it off when he comes past the start-finish line in 05. Alan Jones, David Parsons, 5th in car 30. Win Percy, Russell Ingalls 6th in 7 and 17. The race leader now in 7th place as the new and soon-to-be previous race leader too. M.Skaife into the pits to hand over to Jim Richards.
Neither of the Falcons have done a good stop. It's an opportunity here for the Commodores to get through. I think that what they're playing about with in the lead Falcon was from G.Seton's team, in fact, was just the drink, and that's been a bad mistake.
So Larry Perkins is now the race leader from Tony Longhurst, 11 from 25.
Fueling is the slowest thing, and that's the way it should be under these regulations. Good, slick run from there. That should put that Commodore back into the lead.
Seen what high-pressure fueling does when people try to make a part of a motor race. And what a frightening and nearly very sad situation it was. And Benetton went up in an absolute fireball.
See, Jim really having to work at the wheel. His tyres are cold, and he's lucky to have got out just ahead of the slower car behind him, but he's really having to hang on to the wheel until, there you go, a bit of a lock-up. Everything's cold, got to hold his position. 2 more laps and he'll be quite all right, but this is the time when they can make the most mistakes, because the car's just not handling the way it should.
G.Seton at the moment is 12th, then he's suddenly 11th. Now, this is the situation. He's out of sync with the others, and he's going to pick up a few places here as the others do the stop that was forced on him. And there you see the 05 car, Peter Brock. Third place at the moment. Larry Perkins was the new race leader in car number 11, but in to hand over to Greg Hansford. So Larry out. Former runner-up in the World 250 motorcycle champion Greg Hansford, and twice third in the World 350cc motorcycle championship. Winner of 10 World Championship Grand Prix, Greg Hansford, into the car, doing a stunning job last year for Larry Perkins to take them to victory in the Tooheys 1000 at Bathurst. And a good, quick stop. That's the way to do it. So that Tony Longhurst is now the race leader in 25 until he pits, from Peter Brock in 05. M.Skaife third in 2. Larry Perkins is fourth in 11. Now Greg Hansford. 5th is Alan Jones in 30. 6th in car 7 is Win Percy. 7th from leading the race, but a very long pit stop, and it doesn't do you much use to have an 8-second lead if you have a long pit stop, and you fall back to 7th place with Dick Johnson now at the wheel of 17 from Bob Jones in 12. G.Seton 9th now as he keeps jumping forward as people in front of him pit. And there, Kevin Waldock's car that he's sharing with Mike Preston Playscape racing car. And here, the man that was leading the race till now, Tony Longhurst. We must have had 6 or 7 race leaders of different types, and about 4 of them actually raced for out on the track, several of them coming about by virtue of some of the front runners having slightly earlier pit stops than such as Tony Longhurst in car number 25. So this will put
brake change there.
And it might put the race leader, or sorry, the lead in the hands of the Sandown hero, Peter Brock. And down in the pits with Alan Grice is Ian Campbell.
Thanks, Will. Alan, you've come in, you've done your driver change, but you did a pad change too. Was that scheduled?
Yes, it was. Everybody's going to have to change a set of pads during the day. We've chosen to do it at the first stop because that way it's faster to change. The pistons don't come out of the caliper as much, so you can old pads out, new pads in, you can do it much quicker.
A lot of traffic on the road out there. What's Stephen got to expect in the car?
A lot of traffic. He's got to look after the tyres a bit, he's got to look after the brakes a bit, and watch the traffic. There's some very, very slow traffic. I think there's about 48 Volvos in the race, and there's about 36 Mazda 626s and about 400 small Commodores. So that's the way, that's how many it seemed anyway.
It's been a long while since you've been in a Group A race such as this. How's it feel?
Oh, it's good. The Ford is a very good car to drive. It's probably superior, I think, in the front to the Commodore, and in the rear, you've got to sort of look after the rear of it. But all in all, they're just motor cars. They all turn left when you turn the steering wheel. They all stop when you put your foot on that center pedal.
Alan Grice out for his first stint.
Some politicians come to motor races to be seen. One of them comes to race. Alan Grice, MP, are up there at Broadwater, and we saw car 7 too. The second and the lone surviving Coca-Cola team car win, Percy Russell Ingle. They're 7th in car 7 at the moment, in a race now being led by Thomas Mazira in car 05, taking over from Peter Brock, from Jim Richards now at the helm of car 2, which is 7.14 seconds behind. Greg Hansford is in 3rd place in car number 11, who's 20 seconds behind. David Parsons is 4th in the Alan Jones car number 30. And gracious, my lap score's gone all over the place, so...
Yes, I think we just let the race settle down, and then we can pick up on the various positions once all the heroes have been through the pit stop.
So, this is the car that Peter Brock put on pole position yesterday. It's a brand new car, and this is the significant part of it. And as I was going to say earlier, and as the chart comes back to us, M.Skaife now in the hands of Richards in car number 2, from Parsons in 30, from Mazira in 05. They were just clearing the screen while all the different placings were resorted, and the race lead is okay. So the computer's doing a bit of catching up, so we won't say anything hard and fast at this stage. But the tyre situation, Howard Marsden, is interesting because Dunlop, which, oh dear, and car number 16, the Australian boat manufacturers, is looking a little bit like a boat at the moment. Graham Blythman and Stephen Renshaw, VP Holden Commodore, and that is indeed their day. Fairly straight sort of accident on a slow corner, locked up, gone wide, coming in too fast, and about to get barreled. As he proves to be a slightly over-anxious pedestrian. Bad luck.
Well, the race is now settling back down again into its second phase of 55 laps for the cars in the front. One thing that has been remarkable has been the lack of contact between the cars. There have been no pace cars out yet, despite what we all expected. And so we're getting a good, clean race from that side of the business. So the race at the moment is being won and lost in the pits. The tactic that the Johnson team picked up, which is to change their brake pads early, is based on the fact it is easier to change your pads when they've still got a lot of meat on them, as was said before. The downside is by the time you get to the end of the race, 150 laps, you can possibly have a very bad brake pedal, and if there's a sprint at the end, it may hurt them from that side.
We haven't, of course, seen any of the production cars in yet, one being that they haven't obviously covered anywhere near as many laps as the lead cars, but 2 They don't use fuel at anything like the same sort of rate. And they'll be very easy in terms of their pit stops. They're not expecting to do anything in terms of brakes and very much in terms of tyres, although by virtue of being there, they might just put some on. But Thomas Mazira, the man who was leading the Holden race team as driver until the re-emergence and the remarriage of Peter Brock with the Holden factory a little while ago, and a controversial parting from the factory over the matter of his polarizer, and then a slightly less controversial rejoining, but there were nevertheless probably still some people at Holden who were probably against Brock coming back to the family, but he certainly worked well for them. He won the Eastern Creek round of the Touring Car Championship, and that gave the Holden racing team their first ever victory in a round of the Touring Car Championship. Brock's first for a while, and it certainly is a revitalised Peter Brock, and some say a threatened Thomas Mazira. A very hard-charging man is the Czech who started his career hill climbing a Skoda. Oh! And he's in big trouble, and he just saves it, back onto the track. And you saw it all happen there. We'll no doubt see it again. And he was just forced out, and although it was the car in front, and I think it was Bob Jones, who certainly had right-of-way and had track, it would have been a reasonably gentlemanly thing to have given that faster car enough space to come by. The pace car is out. Now, the pace car's onto the track on lap 63. Have a look at this again, up over the back. The car that's leading the race, Thomas Mazira, talking about the threat to him. He's run out wide by a driver not looking to see that there was a car out there. You shouldn't move over when there's a car there. And boy, Mazira did very well finally to keep it out of that sand trap. Ooh, dear oh me. And Peter Brock back in the pits will no doubt be saying, oh, what have you got to do?
I hope he hasn't flat spotted his front tyres.
So this is the race lead car, or it was. It's now gone back to second place under the pace car because, according to our lap chart here, wait till they come by, M.Skaife, Jim Richards now at the helm of car number 2, that produces a rash of pit stops. Well, it won't produce a rash, but it certainly does for G.Seton. And Seton is 9th at this stage. And so that quick pit stop under a pace car condition,
that would help a bit.
Suited him enormously.
But there is a mistake here. They've actually picked up the wrong car. They picked up the car that's running in second place, Mazira, and M.Skaife, who's in the lead of the car, the lead of the race. In fact, he's getting a clear run round. So they're going to have to try and unravel that one in some way.
They have. So here's the update at this stage, and racing for 1 hour 20 minutes, as you can see, the gap first to second is that bare bit of a second, with Thomas Mazira in 05, Greg Hansford now in 11, David Parsons now in 30, D.Johnson now in 17 in 5th place, and from being 1-2 in the race, Falcons have become 4-5, led by 3 Commodores. And that's the situation at the moment in the Sandown 500. So, pace car still leading the field in the order of race leader. M.Skaife in car 2. Jim Richards now, of course, at the helm of that car, as Thomas Mazira is at the helm of 05. And the gaps don't matter at this stage. They're all gathered together. Have a look at them. In 3rd place, L.Perkins in car number 11. That's the L.Perkins car. Greg Hansford at the wheel. David Parsons at the wheel of 30. John Bowes handed over to Dick Johnson. So Johnson heads car 17 in 5th. Then it's Longhurst in 25. Charlie O'Brien now at the helm of that one. And in car 7, Russell Ingle, the single-seater star, who's been resident in England for about 4 years. Alan Grice has handed over to Junior Johnson, young Stephen. In car 18, it's in 8th place. And then Bradley Jones is in 9th place. And G.Seton now with P.Radisich at the wheel, and having, during the pace car, time made its second pit stop. Car number 1 is in 10th place, and the Mazda in the production car class, Gary Walden, has come in and presumably handed over to Colin Bond by taking advantage of the pace car period. As Paul Morris's Diet Coke car comes to the pits, you can see the smack on his car. A fairly solid one with a bit of body damage, and the other car that was removed from over the old Peter's Corner there, where Sir Gawain Bailey, no, Lex Davison punched the big Galaxy, 7-litre Galaxy, through the fence there when the brakes failed and headed for the little weir that's down behind there.
This particular run we're having at the moment has made no difference to the overall tactics of the race, because all of the lead cars, in fact, had just refueled and retired. So the only person that got any gains out of it is G.Seton, but he still is a lap behind everybody else. And the Mazda was very smart to get in and do its pit stop and get back out whilst the pace car was on. So nothing's really changed overall, other than the cars have been bunched up. They've been bunched up some 5 to 10 laps after they did their major pit stop. So we're back into a very serious motor race with everybody starting again.
1 hour, 28.5 minutes of racing completed, 65 laps covered, about to become 66 as they trickle across the start-finish line, and Murray Carter comes into the pits and out in car number 19. And the lights are out in the pace car, so it's another 3 kilometres, 3.1 full lap distance around Sandown before they come under full-blooded racing again. And the Sandown 500 resumes in all its fury, and there is some fury still to come, because we've got Jim Richards leading the race in car number 2. We've seen that car go back as far as 4th place, but the race falling into a different period now. Different people in the cars. J.Bowe no longer and out of the race as we see our list come up. Wayne Gardner, Neil Crompton on lap 27, the Coca-Cola racing car with the broken steering arm that they told you of on lap 29. The Brett Youlden car, the tail shaft problem that had it wheeled in the Holden Commodore VL to the back of the pits. Paul Morris, Diet Coke Racing, you've seen it just come in. That G.Brabham, who won the race last year, didn't even get to the helm this time. So 3 of them officially out. Man to strike trouble early in the race, who had real braking problems, was G.Seton in car number 1, and has handed over to P.Radisich. And Radisich is one of the people we're delighted to see come join us from overseas, because he's one of the world's great touring car drivers, and indeed to be given a Formula 1 tryout very shortly in some Ford-powered car because of his Ford Mondeo connections in touring car racing. But down in the pits with information from there, and there's plenty happening, John Smales.
And Paul Morris has had 20-odd laps to cool down after being stranded on the circuit. Paul, what happened?
Oh, we just come down the end of the straight and went to go back a couple of gears and just lost all power to the engine. It turns over all right on the battery, but no ignition. So I tried a few things. I was out there over the radio. The boys told me what to do, but lucky enough we've been able to get it back here and hopefully get it out there. 2 problems. You've got G.Brabham now, who needs a drive, doesn't he? He's going to be good for you, Pat. That's right. So we're going to try and get the car going, get him out there and get him some miles so he didn't come all the way from America for nothing. So
the second thing is you are pushing that car to its absolute limit in those opening laps.
Yeah, for sure. So rather having it here than at the mountain in a couple of weeks' time.
Are you concerned that you're pushing it a bit too hard, Paul?
No, it was an electrical problem, so nothing to do with the way we were driving the car. It's a little fault somewhere that's just wrecked the race for us, but hopefully we'll get it sorted out and get back out there.
As the field resumes racing with car 2, Jim Richards leading from Thomas Mazera in car 05. Larry Perkins is the man in 3rd place, or it's Greg Hansford in 11, and he's been given a lot of hurry up at the moment as they go up the back straight. Alan Jones got car 30 into a very good position early, leading the race, but then coming in 2nd. And David Parsons is at the wheel of that, and he'll probably be one of the slower of the lead 2nd drivers.
The interesting things come out of this particular pace car episode is, in fact, the Johnson-Bowe car. They made a very bad stop on their pads, their brake pads, and they were lucky enough to be able to close right up. So suddenly, instead of being 30 seconds off, here they are, again with an opportunity to push for the lead. They've got the fresh pads in, and if their car can get the pads from here all the way through the race meeting, suddenly they've had a nice drop.
Yes, well, in fact, they've headed Greg Hansford. As you can see, he was 20 seconds behind. They were more than that. And let's have a look at the situation as they now come through, and it's fairly different indeed. Jim Richards, from Thomas Mazera, from Parsons, from Johnson into 4th place, Hansford into 5th, Charlie O'Brien 6th in 25, and 7 is still 7th. There you see it. And in fact, car 17 is behind it. Now there's 68 laps covered by the leading 6 at this stage. And it's 1 lap down to Russell Ingall in car 7, which is why it's heading car number 17.
Or it was.
And that was a little bit over-daring, I'd have said, on Russell Ingall's part. But he's still daring. And this is a flurry. Hansford's had his nose cut off. Not literally, but figuratively. And he just ducked the Castrol car out of the way. And yes, blue smoke.
He must have touched. There's something, yes, the rear wheel. That's very bad luck, in fact, for Dickie Johnson, having had the luck of the pace car go his particular way. He's just been touched in the back there, and I don't know how serious that one is on the damage that's been done. That's interesting.
So, the leading 6 cars: 2, Jim Richards; 05, Mazera; 30, David Parsons; 17, Dick Johnson; 11, Greg Hansford; and 25, Charlie O'Brien, are all on the same lap and only 11 seconds apart, the top 6. But it's then 1 lap down, that big gap that you see to car 7 in 7th place. Russell Ingall from 18 in 8th place. Stephen Johnson, 9th. And these are all 1 lap down. Is Brad Jones, and then it's Radisich in car number 1 in 10th place. Now he's only 1 lap down, and he was 2, so he's recovered 1. So situation certainly changing, and that pace car period changing the whole structure of the race for the top 6 people, and they quite obviously are the top 6 contenders at this stage. 70 laps completed as they storm down the straight in front of the big grandstand here. The weather's still holding off, the sky grey, a whole ceiling of cloud over the track. But no threat of, well, no likelihood, it seems, at this stage of rain actually falling. It's a fairly high ceiling of cloud. And there you see 7th place car number 7. With Russell Ingall at the wheel that was getting into that contretemps with Dick Johnson and with Greg Hansford. Greg Hansford in car 11's in 5th place. Car 7, a lap down, is of course 2 places further back, but fighting and arguing. So still this real thorn in the side of a couple of the cars on the lead lap. It was Dick Johnson in 17 who was caught up by it and finding life difficult. It's now Greg Hansford in 11, and it wouldn't be suiting Greg Hansford at all. But Russell Ingall is a hard racer, and he lives and earns his money in a very different environment to the one here. This is, for all that it's very hard and very quick and very competitive, it's more man eat man over there, dog eat dog. And Russell Ingall showed that then, when with no thought to reputations at all, for all his minute experience in these sorts of cars, he was arguing with Dick Johnson, and he's still arguing with Greg Hansford. As you see here, Hansford, 5th place, wants to get by a car that's a lap behind him.
It's interesting. Ingall, with his single-seater experience, is not happy with the brakes on the touring car, and he's just giving it a little bit of a flick before he gets to the corner to make sure that it's there.
Yeah. These would be diabolical by comparison with what he's used to.
That's right.
In what he's used to, you get to about the 100-metre mark and you jump on them and you feel this brick-like thing under you, and the car, you feel as though you've run into a very strong bungee cord, a bit like the one on aircraft carriers.
But he's looking for that confidence, Dave. Are the brakes still there? Am I going to stop this time? And then through the corner.
And Greg Hansford's frustrated because in 5th place, he's losing time to 4 cars that he wants to stick with. And now he's got him. And that took some work. Look, he's very busy. Lots of minute adjustment. He had to earn that, but it was hard. Larry Perkins would be proud of him because Larry has great confidence. He said, no, just let him take over the car. Don't worry, it's not in my hands. And he has, in fact, enormous faith in Greg Hansford. He said, if I couldn't got him for this year, I don't know who I'd have got. And after the 12-hour at Bathurst, he said to Greg, last year, I want you for this year. And he followed up very quickly after their victory and said, I'd love to see you back. But look at Russell Ingall, Howard Marsden, and it does show, doesn't it, the hardness that gets into you when you race so many more times against so many more people when you get over into that field, really the headquarters of motor racing, which is England.
Yeah, he's doing a fine job of settling down into what really are large and heavy cars. These cars weigh in at 1,300 kilograms. They've got the 550 plus horsepower in them. The tyres are not so large for that sort of weight and power balance, and he's settling down nicely, and as you said, good, intelligent, aggressive stuff.
And with us now up in the commentary box, we have the managing editor of the most recent motorsport magazine onto the market, a fortnightly that keeps everybody up to date with what goes on, Motorsport News. Chris Lambden, who's not so long out of touring cars himself. But Chris, the situation close to the teams, how do you see the race situation as it is at the moment?
Well, certainly that pace car period has changed the complexion of the race. It's I suppose you'd say rescued the race for the Shell team.
Is this nice and redolent for you of what it was like being in the car? Because the hammering and the violence and the clanking and banging that goes on is quite sensational.
No, indeed. Hansford is very fresh in the car. Still does take 10 or 12 laps to actually get yourself into the groove, and having to deal with a lap car that really did get in his way. Something you don't really want to have to deal with at this stage. But you can see he's settling in now, and you know, his job's to look after this car until the next period of pit stops. When Larry Perkins will get back in the car.
So Hansford doing a good job though, because he managed to look after the car in doing it. Chris, the tyre war's an interesting one, Dunlop and Bridgestone and Yokohama, and there's a dry weather sort of relationship between them, and there's a wet weather one as well.
Well, yes, indeed. I suppose again the surprise for the day is the performance of John Bowes Dunlops in that first stint. Normally, they're not considered quite the long-distance durable tyre, but they held on so well that it really now leaves the race entirely wide open. There's very, very little between the tyres.
That was a stunning stint by Bowe, didn't you think? I mean, very quick and hard.
Well, fantastic from where he started on the grid. You know, I mean, Dick did exactly the right thing by putting Bowe in the car. He is a charger, and he did everything correctly. And as I said, they muffed it a bit with that brake pad change, but you know, they're right back in it. There's one of the most consistent privateers around at the moment, Don Watson. He's running in 16th place at the moment. Very, very consistent member of the privateer sect, and indeed the privateer battle at the moment is going on in 10th and 11th place between the Greg Crick car and the Bob Jones car. They haven't been more than 30 metres apart for the entire distance so far. I mean, they're actually scraping guards and carrying on, and that's a hell of a contest back there.
Don Watson runs a refrigerated transport between major capitals, Sydney, Melbourne and others, something like 35 trucks, and many of them Mercedes-Benz, hence the badge proudly worn on the overalls of their very nicely turned out team.
Indeed, Don's actually a relatively recent arrival on the touring car scene, and has just got better and better. And I must say, I think it was the penultimate Shell Series round. He was actually the top privateer, won both heats in privateer terms, and you know, certainly a top operator.
He's doing a great job. Here's the Kevin Walduck car, but also the Mazda of Gary Walden and Colin Bond, and that car was battling in the production class, was leading it, fell back out of the lead at one stage with the Porsche 968 of Stephen Richards getting up ahead of it. But as we come to the aerial shot now, you're talking of Bob Jones, and there he goes in the Ampol Max car.
Indeed, Bob actually took out the Privateer Cup that we indeed co-sponsor with Dunlop in the Shell Series, and he and the Greg Crick have been at it hammer and tongs throughout this entire race, and I think as you look at the Max 3 car coming onto the straight, you might see the next car up the road. Yes, there it is. It's the Greg Crick car in front of him, actually being driven at the moment by Tony Scott. They've really not been more than a few metres apart throughout.
And there the other production car, 9, is in 19th place, and this is Neville Crichton's BMW M3 that's been... no, I don't think it's pitted yet. No, that's... So Mark Brame to get into that car.
That's their big hope, you know, because the RX-7s are quite thirsty and they're expecting 3 stops, whereas Neville Crichton actually thinks they'll get through on 1 stop with the BMW, so...
It's marginal, but they're hoping, as you say, to do that. The other thing, though, that's been upsetting them is that they've been very hard on their brakes, and they've had a couple of warped discs and getting a lot of vibration under heavy braking. But you'll probably find that Neville Crichton in the car won't encounter the problem, and Mark Brame in the next session going quicker, working them harder, may.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Worth watching. So that car, number 9, in 19th place at the moment, is second in the production class being led by car 34, Stephen Richards, in the Porsche 968 CS, with Colin Bond, after 1 pit stop in the Mazda. It's in 20th place outright, so 18th, 19th and 20th are the 3 leading production cars, and not that far apart either, and with some different scenarios to come, particularly with Mark Brame, the little Suzuki GTI punter that won that 6-hour race at Winton outright with Henry Draper, and then went so well, has gone so well, gosh, every year at the James Hardy 12-hour. He's been the outstanding performer, not only in winning his class for up to 1600cc cars with a 1300cc car. In fact, it went out to 2 litres this year, and he still knocked them all off. And on top of that, he's come into the most amazing outright places. He really is a very good steerer. I bet he's itching to get to the wheel of the BMW number 9. And another nice luxury car, but different configuration to the BMW M3. This Volvo 850 T5, the turbo, 5-cylinder, and Jan Lammer's Chris really shows how to get round but keep out of the way in a slower car in a field of big hotties.
Well, indeed. I mean, Jan Lammers is possibly the most currently experienced driver in the race, not too long out of Formula 1, and here he is driving basically a production Volvo. Certainly.
The walnut dash looks well, doesn't it?
Well, indeed. I'd say he's having a very quiet Sunday afternoon drive out there, but as you say, his experience does allow him to do the right thing, because there's a lot of fast cars coming up behind him regularly, and here we see M.Skaife just powering past. That's the speed differential he's having to deal with, so, you know, he's probably spending the day keeping at least one of his eyes on the mirrors.
On the road, that Volvo is a quick car. I mean, it really does get up and go quickly, and look at the way those racing cars are tearing by.
Well, indeed. I mean, it does show you the size of the cars, you know, the V8 engines. There goes another. I mean, that's 4 cars that passed him in one straight. So, you know, he's probably driving that Volvo just as fast as it's possible to drive it, but you have to stand there and spend some time looking at what's coming up behind you.
22nd place at the moment, so about 4th or 5th in the production car class, but certainly the biggest, the tallest, the most roomy, and probably the most comfortable of all the cars there in production car terms. And meanwhile, at the front of the field, it's Jim Richards in car number 2, after that awesome display by J.Bowe in the Falcon number 17. And have a look at it. Not so very far behind is D.Johnson in 17. 1.6 seconds blank at the first 3 cars. M.Skaife in car 2. From Mazira in car 05 to Johnson in car 17, it's only 3 seconds further back to David Parsons in 30, who's 4th. 3 seconds further, 7.7 overall, to Hansford, 5th in car number 11. And Larry would be happy enough with that at this stage. Keep it there. If you hand it over to me with that sort of a gap, well, I'll have a charge for the finish. And 25, Tony Longhurst, still on the same lap as the others, but 22, nearly 23 seconds behind. So the battle really between those top 5, with the Longhurst O'Brien car doing 16.2s at the moment, where the others are still doing 14s and 15s, as you see here on the board as it goes through in order. There you see the production cars coming up. Neville Crichton ahead of the Gary Walden Colin Bond Mazda RX-7.
This is incredibly close at the front at this stage of a race. I mean, these 5 cars were within a few seconds of each other before that first round of pit stops, and they're still running within a few seconds. Now, this is going to go on for the rest of this race.
And they are coming, as they come onto the back straight, to exactly half race distance. They're 80.5 laps of a 161-lap race.
And 7 seconds between the first 5 cars. 5 between the first 4 is amazing, and there's 3 different tyre companies there in that front 3, and honestly, at this stage, I'd say that D.Johnson is actually looking the fastest car on the road, and the fact that he's stuck in there behind Mazera, but he's come from a little way back to be there.
And
there
he's
he
second.
goes.
He's second. Punched through very nicely on Thomas Mazera. So let's run through, not the cars and the drivers, you know them well, but Skaife on Yokohamas, Dick Johnson coming through on Dunlops, Thomas Mazera on Bridgestones. Bridgestones also for David Parsons in the Peter Jackson team, car number 30. Dunlops for the Greg Hansford, Larry Perkins combo, car number 11. And in car 25, the Charlie O'Brien driven car at the moment of Tony Longhurst. It's Yokohamas again.
Yes, indeed, and it was interesting that the Johnson team had a clear choice of 2 compounds for this race, and they actually went for the slightly slower one that they felt would just persevere and keep on doing the times. And, well, you'd have to say they'd made the right decision, wouldn't you?
Going pretty well. I caught up with Larry on the night of a test for the Bathurst tyres at Malala. This was for Dunlops, and he and I think the Johnson team did the test for the day. And they were testing at that stage compound, not construction. They'd done construction earlier. They're having to sign off and to order them, and this was back in about July, and that was for Bathurst. He said, boy, I'm happy. We're better off this year than we were last year. There's a little bit of psych goes into that, but we were having a private and sort of, in a sense, unofficial conversation too, and I reckon there was a fair deal of sincerity to it.
Well, that's true. That's where they actually tested this new compound. It's called an M9 compound, and both Dick and Greg Hansford further back are on this compound. They've both selected it for this race. You're correct. That's where the testing was done back at the Malala touring car round, and well, clearly they've done it well.
Less than 1 minute, 1 hour 50 of racing to get half distance. As we look at the Porsche 968 CS, Stephen Richards, and the car that he's sharing with Gary Rogers, and owned by Stephen's father, Jim, but ex-Peter Fitzgerald racing team. And, well, they're doing a good job. They're leading the production car class. A beautifully balanced car, those Porsche 968s. Gee, they're a sweet thing. Big 4-cylinder engine. Very torquey. Wind them up from quite low revs, rev them out well. And as a road car, a gloriously balanced, usable car.
Indeed, this is part of the... I suppose the grooming of Stephen Richards for a future in touring cars. Father Jim wasn't too keen for him to jump straight into V8s, and this is what this car was acquired for, so that Stephen Richards could learn about long-distance racing in a production car, do long-distance driving, the concentration, all that is required.
Just see the way he hung the back of it there as he went over the top. It sounds stupid to say it, but they really are a very easy car to drive, and that's not taking away from Stephen at all. He's using it marvellously well. But they are very good to drive, and he is getting them round well. Look at the way that he got one of the lead drivers through, and this will be one of the things of his little exercise. He did the right thing there. Exactly. Stayed on the correct side of track. Don't change line as he goes to the pits now. One of the things that will get him accreditation here is not only the way he controls that car, but how easily he lets the really fast stuff by and how well he uses his mirrors. He's doing a grand job.
Indeed,
He's 18th outright at the moment, still leading the BMW M3. That's 19th and second in the production class, and Gary Walden, Colin Bond, which is 20th. 11 laps down, the 3 of them on the race leaders. Stephen Richards out.
And Gary Rogers getting into the car. Yes, there are great plans for Stephen next year. I don't know if it's entirely public yet, but he looks like going into 2-litre racing, and this is just the right sort of training and background he needs.
What they've done well with on this Porsche is they've just made halfway.
Yes.
They've just got over the halfway, done exactly the right thing. They're not even bothering with pads, it looks like, from this point of view. And Gary Rogers going in at the other end of the age scale from young Stephen will do a good regular job, and they're looking very strong.
I wonder what happens when father, here in car number 2, comes by the Porsche. How much they acknowledge each other as he goes by, because you've got to see him within, they've done 83 laps and they're 11 laps down. So he's got to see them once every 7.5 laps.
Well, indeed, in this case, I don't think there's any great drama with father passing son, but I must say that the same's probably not the case in the Johnson team, where both Father Johnson and Junior Johnson even had a discussion about who lives where and who pays the bills not so long ago.
And his son Stephen comes out, the reigning Formula Ford champion in Australia this year. That battle for the lead is a very serious one indeed. You've got a number 2 driver in this car on this occasion, Jim Richards, with the lead driver for car 17, and the lead driver can just take responsibility for using it a little bit harder, a little bit more riskily than can the driver of the car in front, as Johnson claims the lead. And I just thought that that would happen, because Johnson, apart from the fact that things obviously quick and being very well used by both Johnson and Bowe, I think he's just a little bit more determined, a little bit more committed at this stage than conservative Jim.
I agree. How very professional that overtaking from both of them. Jim just seeing that his time to move across, Dickie understanding that, going through completely clean and on to the next lap. And there goes the Ford cheer.
Yes, the Shell car looks to be about 0.3 of a second faster than Jim Richards in the Winfield car at this stage, and that's generally enough to afford you the opportunity to make a passing move without getting into any serious bother. But remember, the Shell team did lose that ground during the pit stop, and I think that Richards will now hang on as best he can and rely on the professionalism of his team at the next stop to reclaim the ground.
Remembering, of course, that they will have to make the pad change, which the Johnson team have already been lucky enough to get away with the makeup that they had from the pace car.
An amazing opening stint, actually, to start from 15th grid position, to come up to an 8-second lead by the first pit stop as Dick gets a bit urgent and a bit excited about the prospect of going by Don Watson, who's gone off, quickly regains the track. Then to drop back as far as they did on what was a bit of a fluffed pit stop, and then suddenly with the pace car to get pulled back into it and to regain the lead. The race so far has fallen their way. Not just fallen their way, they've earned it as well, but they've also had some good fortune.
It's interesting watching the Mazira-driven 05 car coming up again onto Jimmy Richards, and I think it won't be too long now before we get another change from second to third.
Johnson's in a hurry, and Chris Lambden, he wasn't in so much of a hurry in the Touring Car Championship earlier in the year. We'll come back to that, because down in the pits at the moment is John Smales with M.Skaife.
And M.Skaife, just how good is that Johnson car today?
No, it's going very well. It went well here at the Touring Car Championship round, and I suppose it's not new news. They should be competitive. They were Bowie come from a fair way back to get to us, and you know, credit to them. Well done.
Had you expected to see what you saw just now?
Well, I expected it to be an unbelievably tough race, and that's what it's been so far. You know, the battle that Jonesy and I had to begin with, and then Bowie caught us, and really towards the end, we're all doing low 15s, and you know, that's as quick as we did at the touring car round. So it's you know, a 500k sprint race.
Well, right now, what can you do to haul that back when you get back in the motor car?
Just try about as hard as I did last time. Let's see what happens.
Well, it's you on Bowe, and that's an awesome combination. What can you do to beat Bowe?
Oh, well, you know, press on. That's all you can do. You can only do your best, and we'll certainly be doing that.
How are you feeling at the moment, mate?
Fantastic, no problem.
Loves a good hard motor race, does M.Skaife, the Australian Touring Car Champion, winner at Bathurst, dedicated, well-equipped, talented, and pretty much the man to beat. But at the moment, certainly had the gauntlet thrown down to them by several teams here, because Howard Marsden and Chris Lambden, this combination that's leading the race at the moment, fairly obviously if you're leading the race at lap 87 as they are, past half race distance, and they've galloped into the lead from behind on 2 occasions now, then you've got a lot of pace and you're hard to toss. But we haven't yet seen the final sprint from car number 2. We haven't seen Brock back into car 05 yet, and we haven't seen Larry Perkins getting urgent and after another victory in car number 11. So I suspect we have a fabulous possibility of motor race on our hands between now and race end.
Yes, I mean, how much closer could you be after this sort of period of time?
Yes, indeed. As I said, we've got in the shell car, I mean, Dick wouldn't mind me saying, I don't think, that Bowie's probably slightly the faster driver around this track. So we've actually got the backup drivers in each car here at the moment in terms of this race today.
I saw Dick Johnson last night as we went back into the city, and he was practicing some of his traffic technique. And I don't say that rudely or in any way he was breaking the law, but he was getting along very efficiently in a Lexus, of all things. And he and J.Bowe and young Johnson Stephen and a couple of others all looking very comfortably ensconced indeed. And in fact, I got a bit of a break on them at one stage in traffic, and I thought, oh, and they got caught by some lights. And then blow me down, we got to St Kilda Road, and there they were in front of me. Now, I don't know what they did, because I'm sure they didn't come by, not on the road that I was on, but somehow Johnson was working on the problem. And as he's doing now, he's found his way through and doing a great job. And as I was saying earlier, Chris Lambden, it wasn't always a sort of persuasive effort by Dick Johnson earlier in the Touring Car Championship this year.
Well, no, it's true to say Dick's probably had his ups and downs in this championship year, but his team, you ask anyone and they say, look, if Dick's in the mood and Dick's got motivation, he's as quick as Bowie. And you'd have to say that today Bowie's put the car in a position to do well, and Dick's driving extremely well.
And indeed, the other half of the combination, J.Bowe, is in the pits with John Smales.
And in the pits, J.Bowe. And John, how are you feeling knowing that for 15 years Dick Johnson's been trying to win this race and he's never got up?
Well, John, I'm not actually thinking about that. I'm more thinking about, you know, if the car's going well, and just trying to plan my strategy for the rest of the race. The car is without doubt the best racing touring car I've ever driven. It was just so good in the early stages of the race, and obviously it's still good. So it's a credit to the guys from Dick Johnson Racing. They've done an amazing job.
You recognise it's you on Skaife for that sprint to the finish.
Oh, well, big deal.
Where do you reckon him? Where's Skaife got the advantage? Where have you got the advantage?
I don't know. I mean, there's not much in the cars at all, any of them. Our car was particularly good under brakes, and our Dunlop tyres were just amazingly good. I did a 14.4 on lap 47 of my stint, which is just incredible. So, I mean, I just have to give credit to Dunlop as well.
What's Dick telling you at the moment from the car?
Well, the radio went down on about lap 10, so we can't converse, unfortunately.
He'd be hearing every noise in that motor car at the moment, wouldn't he?
Well, probably not. I mean, your concentration level is so high that and your focus is so strong, you don't really worry about anything but what you're doing.
J.Bowe, best of luck for the next 80 laps.
Thanks, mate.
It's been a great effort by them, but down the other end of the pits, Ian Campbell.
In 1988, this young lady rewrote the record books of motorsport by winning the first ever Oscar event. She went on to prove that she wasn't just an ordinary driver by winning a stock car event a couple of years later. 93 saw her win the SBR Truck Championship in Australia, and Terry Sawyer's here today having her first big race in the Sandown 500. How does it feel?
Excellent. We just had a really good run. Everything went well. I kept out of the big boys' way, so that's the main thing, and hopefully Murray can finish the race in one piece.
The car itself, of course, the pulse of, what about pit stops? Is this the only one?
We've had two now, so we'll probably have one about 30 laps towards the end, and then just sprint the finish.
So what's the future for Terry Sawyer after this?
We'll probably persist with Murray a little bit more. Not really sure, nothing's definite at the moment. We'll just see how it goes.
Pizza maker extraordinaire for Butterham here today, racing in the Sandown 500, Terry Sawyer.
As we see the battle at the lead continue in what is an enthralling Sandown 500. Don't forget all the things as we come to Terry Sawyer's car. One says that carefully because Murray Carter owns the thing. Next Nissan test car that's not allowed to be registered. It has to be scrapped because it was never an ADR or a warranted car. But it's been a very useful race car for the veteran driver. And I mean, if of all the people that get called veterans, Colin Bond says, I've lost that appellation now that I've retired. They're calling Brock a veteran. And I've come out of retirement. But Murray Carter really is the veteran. He's in his 60s. He raced motorcycles and Ford Custom lines, and he raced motorcycles when they were black and the leathers were black. And he doesn't know how to stop motor racing, and as you can see, the ABC chopper doing a tremendous job. Is it ABC? It's SBS, I'm sure. And doing a tremendous job as Murray Carter keeps out of the way too, and even the Nissan Pulsar getting away slightly.
I was talking to young Tracy yesterday, actually, and I just said, is this your first race at Sandown? And she said, oh, no, I've raced trucks here before, and I must say I was stuck for the next question.
This car actually finished second in the production car championship this year, driven by Murray, so that wasn't a bad effort for an old bloke.
Oh, no, Murray goes very well indeed. You see he's only a slight man, and he sits sort of slouched in the car a bit. But Terry Sawyer, who was a very fierce kart driver as well, picked herself up off one very big endo and toss out of the kart at Oran Park and dusted herself down and kept racing later in the day. And she's a very talented and hard gal. And I've always theorised, and I don't know what you as a team manager, Howard, a former team manager, think. I've always theorised that women can drive the cars probably with the same amount of experience as well as the men. They don't ultimately have that final bit of aggression and want to argue as hard over a point as a man.
Yeah, I think that it's a matter of it's not quite as important to them to continue to push all the time as that male aggression hormone that we run.
As we see Brad Jones in car 15, that's in 7th place at this stage.
Actually, he's handed over to young Craig Lowndes at that last stop, and I'm glad we're just following young Craig for a while, because he's a recent signing by the Holden race team, and you know, the motor racing fraternity as such are expecting some big things from Craig a little way down the track.
In fact, Fred Gibson, heading the Winfield team, has been quoted as saying, I hope they don't put too much pressure on him too early and sort of knock him about, because they see him, along with a lot of other people, as one of the really great talents. As we see this battle, have a look at this. This is really good stuff with car 05 just leading David Parsons in car 30. 3rd and 4th. Lights on, helicopter fading in the distance. Absolutely fabulous stuff here at Sandown. Down towards Dandenong Road corner. And there, Brad Jones, Craig Lowndes in car 15. So Frank Lowndes has, of course, been a CAMS official, technical man for many, many years. And his son, Craig, is showing great talent and arousing a lot of very high-level interest among team managers.
Yes, well, indeed. I mean, I think it's almost a fallacy these days to talk about inexperience of a young driver. Craig's 20. He's got a very, very sensible head on his shoulders. He's a Formula Ford champion, and the team manager, Jeff Gretsch at HRT, has been incredibly impressed by the way he's settled into the team, settled into the car, and believe me, they won't put pressure on him, but I think he'll perform admirably.
30 that we're watching now in 5th place. So that puts 17, Dick Johnson, 2, Jim Richards, 05, Thomas Mazera, 11, Greg Hansford in front of him. Immediately behind, Tony Longhurst, who's handed over to Charlie O'Brien in 25. And then Craig Lowndes in 15 is in 7th place. The Russell Ingall crewed car now, number 7. The second Coca-Cola team car that Win Percy is also using is in 8th place, followed by G.Seton, P.Radisich, 9th, Alan Grice, and Stephen Junior Johnson, 10th in 18. On board with Hansford, coming up to the car that he took to victory at Bathurst last year. Great stuff. And the Mazda RX-7 that is now 2nd in the production car class. Everything's changed. The Porsche 968 that had been leading the class and been 18th outright has come to 3rd in the class and 20th outright, with the Crichton Mark Brame BMW number 9 leading. They're 12 laps down from Gary Walden, Colin Bond. In fact, I think it's Colin Bond in that car at the moment. They're in 19th place outright. And one of the great talents and most experienced drivers in Australian motorsport, Colin Bond, like Win Percy, decided to retire and then team managers looking around for real talent, for people to look after a car, not to abuse it, to drive it well and to stay out of trouble, said Colin, and this was Fred Gibson in the Winfield team, come here. So at Bathurst, he'll be in one of the Winfield team cars with Fred Gibson, but at the moment he's in the Mazda driving with Gary Walden, and in both cases doing an outstanding job. Colin, in all truth, had let himself down a little bit in recent times trying to manage and prepare and run a team, and doing it in the 2-litre class, and often running into problems, doing it too many jobs and on too small a budget. But as a driver, he's an enormous talent. He was one of the great Australian rally drivers, but also judged to be a very, very good one on world standards. One of the top rally drivers in the world, Rano Altonen, said you should go overseas. And he's been an Australian touring car champion. He's won Bathurst. He's won in Motorcarnas. He's driven single-seaters up to Formula 5000 in his first drive in the wet at Warwick Farm, not quite 100 years ago, but it seems a long time ago. In the wet, he just handled it like an experienced maestro, which he wasn't at the time. And in fact, I remember him in single-seaters in his early days of motor racing in Lynx Peugeot Supercharged. So he's really, like a lot of these drivers, aspire to do the thing in single-seaters, found that it pays in touring cars, and that's where he's done a lot of his work in recent times. But a great talent and a very heady driver indeed. Mark Brame hooked up with him in the BMW and followed him round for a few laps. I said, you're probably too young to remember that Colin Bond is so good, as we see what was one of those BP Visco Mazda team cars, but it's now a Falcon Tyres car, with a little bit of trouble. And blowing some smoke suggests that car 61, Keith Carling and Kevin Burton's Mazda RX-7, I think might have not so much tyre problem as engine problem. I think it might be turbo problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. There's not enough smoke, having sort of had some experience of blown turbos. It seems to be coming from the right and rear of the car. Wouldn't like to make a guess at this stage.
So perhaps it is tyre. Did you ever keep count, Howard, of how many turbos you changed in the Nissan Bluebirds?
No, we didn't. In fact, I was just quoted on one occasion by saying that not necessarily where there's smoke is there a Nissan Bluebird, but that was a long time ago.
Dick Johnson used to call them hairdryers derogatively when he was running Ford Sierras, as he forcefully puts his nose in there, makes it very clear to the other driver, I'm here, boy, and you've got no chance. And that's the way to do it too. There's two obligations on drivers. One's to get in there, but also to make your intention very clear. Have a look at the current placings. Falcon EB leads from Commodore VP. Remember, they'll be replaced by the current model cars, Commodore VR and Falcon EF, by the start of next season, next February. So you'll see them only here, then at Bathurst, then at the Australian Grand Prix, yet to be confirmed. There's rounding out the top 12 with that Bob Jones and Greg Crick battle that Chris Lambden was talking about in the privateer area, then further of the privateers until you come down to the leading one in 18th place of the production cars. Neville Crichton, Mark Brame, the BMW M3 from the Mazda RX-7, the Porsche 968 CS. First, second and third in that class. Then the Keith Carling, Kevin Burton RX-7, the Falcon Tyres car, the Jan Lammers Volvo, Murray Carter's car, and then the Mazda 626 of Danny Bogut and Ian Sawtell. And the other end of the field, Dick Johnson in 17, leading by 3 1/4 seconds in this Sandown 598 laps completed in a lap with 63 to run, in a race with 63 to run.
It's interesting, the first three cars, in fact, the Johnson car, the Skaife car and the 05 Brock car, are still running in the very low 1:15s, and they're starting to move away a little bit from the next grouping of Perkins, Jones and the Longhurst vehicles, who are circulating in the 16. So a bit of a break coming on the first three cars.
And of course we're now really only about 10 laps from when the second round of pit stops is going to spell out how this race ends.
Indeed, that will be the start of the final phase of the race as we look at 8th place and 9th place. This is P.Radisich. We saw him arguing very hard a little while ago. And in fact, no, I'm thinking of Russell Ingall there, but Radisich is in G.Seton's car number 1, and he's hot on the heels. Both of these cars 2 laps down. Win Percy Russell Ingall in car number 7. It was the car 7 that was handing out all the aggravation, and the very forceful driving from Russell Ingall there on the right. The British driver Win Percy on the left, he was the man that got upside down in a Jaguar at Le Mans in one of the all-time frightening motor race crashes. I don't know what speed he was doing when the roof was on the ground, but he said he could feel it being ground away and his helmet got banged about, and it was a fearful crash. And his boss, Tom Walkinshaw, said, I don't want you to get into cars like that again, as coming down the inside nearly was Radisich. And again, remember, these two guys make their living in Europe, and that means they race so much more often. They come up against so many more people with good equipment and with lots of experience and dreams of getting to the top in world racing. Radisich, the New Zealander there on the right, in the car at the moment, who came out on top of the world's touring car best at Monza last year, hasn't had such a good year in the Ford Mondeo this year, but a tremendously fast and impressive driver, fast enough to impress Formula One teams to give him a tryout fairly soon, and arguing at the moment with Russell Ingall, the Australian that makes his living over there in single-seaters. Radisich has run single-seaters. As you see now, he comes up to 8th place, putting Ingall back to 9th. Radisich has run single-seaters too, which is why they think it's worth giving the 31-year-old a try, and it's Ford at the helm of all this. Ford that I think's actually had a fairly bad run from the Benetton team, who've had a winning engine from them in a winning combination, and had the Benetton team constantly saying, gee, it'll be good when we get a Peugeot V10.
Yes, young Radisich.
Renault, at least.
He's been around motor racing since he was a naff. His father was a very, very well-known racer over in New Zealand, Frank Radisich, and he's actually over here at this weekend watching his son, who's now regarded as one of the top touring car drivers in the world. So Paul's been around race cars since he was knee-high, and has now found a niche for himself, earning a living 2-litre racing in Europe. I must say he finds the rear-wheel drive V8 with 580-odd horsepower something a little different, but he's really enjoying it.
Yes, it's good stuff, and yes, just to clarify that, there's the Peugeot V10, of course, in the back of the McLarens, but the winning V10 at this stage, with in fact quite a lot more races and years of development behind it, is the Renault V10 that's in the Williams, but also, of course, going into the Benetton for next year. And as I say, I think Ford's had a bad run out of that. It was a newly developed engine for this year, and kicking curbs is very much in fashion here with Radisich, and they live on curbs in Britain, don't they, Howard Marsden?
It's about the only way they can actually hook the front end of the front-wheel drive cars in the UK. They're actually trying to get them over the edge to hook the front end, to get the understeer out of the car and unsettle the back end to make it slide. So he's learnt that one well, and he's handling it well under these conditions.
One of the other different things is not only the 580-plus horsepower and rear-wheel drive of this car, by comparison with the much less horsepower in the front-wheel drive of the sort of car he drives in Europe, but is the very much softer, more compliant springing that he gets in these. Funny to say that these are soft because they're pretty stiff by comparison with any normal sort of car, but the British 2-litre touring cars, Howard Marsden, are sprung like rocks.
Yes, they are, and they don't have any power steering, they don't have any wheel movement on the front of the car, and they are the nearest thing you're going to get to a go-kart.
And now this is the Greg Crick Tony Scott car, with Tony Scott doing his stint at the wheel. They are running 10th, 11th, 12th at the moment, still in this dice with the Bob Jones car, which is just a little way up the road in front of them. As I said, these guys have slogged it out all year, these two teams, in the privateer section of Australian touring car racing. This is actually a brand new car. Up until now, they raced what was Peter Brock's 05 car from last year, which they'd purchased. But Greg Crick's people down in Tasmania just completed this brand new car, first time out this weekend. A couple of teething problems on Friday, which meant they didn't actually seriously get on the track until Saturday, and here they are fighting out again with their nemesis Bob Jones.
Greg Crick, sports sedan champion, and also Targa Tasmania specialist in the state in which he lives, and running a Honda NSX, which I suppose is pretty appropriate for a Honda dealer from Launceston.
The race now is at 103 laps. It goes through to 161 laps, which means they've got some 57 laps to do. They've got to bring that 57 down to at least a 55 lap margin, so they can come in to make their final stop and get enough fuel to get through without having to stop again at all in the race meeting. J.Bowe
was talking and delighted with the fact that on lap 47 he was able to do a 14.4. Dick Johnson on lap 103 has done a 15.7. So he's about the same distance, a tad further on in his stint. And but the car older, everything just probably getting a little bit more worn, as in the pits now is car number 18 from 10th place. Stephen Johnson in to hand over, as they did in the first stint, coming in before the team's lead car, and indeed the race leader at this stage. 17 to hand back over to the Honourable Queensland MP, Mr. Alan Grice.
And a smart move this. They get their second car in and out of the way before there'll be a tremendous rush within about 3 laps now of all the lead cars coming in. So this one's settled out. Team can then get themselves fully organised to have a really good stop for Dickie when he comes in on this occasion. Remembering, Dickie's car changed pads last time. He doesn't have to stop for brake pads, whereas many of the other cars will have to on this occasion.
If anything, I'd say the disappointing aspect about this race has probably been the pace of car 18. I think Dick and J.Bowe would like to see their backup car doing better than 10th place at 2 laps down. But that's often the way it is. In fact, Larry Perkins says running a second car is just a nuisance.
Yes, I did refer earlier to the fact that the Shell team did have a choice of 2 Dunlop compounds. They actually opted to test the other compound on this second car. So there is that differential between the 2 cars, and it may explain the fact that the car's running that little bit slower than the lead car.
Up the back straight of Sandown now, and for this car 18 with 102 laps completed, coming up to complete 103 by comparison with car number 30, 5th place outright, 18.75 seconds behind the race leader, and 104 laps completed on their 105th. So a really interesting motor race in hand here, with less than 20 seconds over the top 5, about to go into the final, the 3rd and final bracket of the race. And car 18 now back in the hands of the tough nuggety Alan Grice. Take no nonsense, but take as many prisoners as you can find in car number 18. Loves his motor racing, no longer with a regular drive, but always has served it up to people, and like many of the other drivers in this field, a winner in the pinnacle of Australian motor racing at Bathurst, and a very fast, hard driver indeed.
How'd you like to be on any of the crews of these front 3 cars that are not far off making their stop? There's 4 seconds between them, and would you like to be the guy that drops the wheel nut now? Will? Because, I mean, well, it could well come down to something as simple as that.
Like a lot of these things, you can stand there and look and say, gee, it looks easy. I did it on a NASCAR up at the IndyCar Grand Prix, and it isn't easy. Now, I had to chase wheel nuts because they don't have the central locking system that most of these cars have. But I can tell you, the rattle gun, you know, it looks a marvellous thing, but get it on the nut properly and all the rest of it, and you're pretty anxious. And it was an interesting exercise, and it showed that, like anything, practice and a bit of expertise is a damn good thing.
Well, indeed, HRT over the last 2 or 3 weeks have spent an hour a day just sitting there in their workshop doing simulated wheel changes, pit stops, all that kind of thing. But as you quite correctly say, well, when you get out there and the car's red hot and everything's hot, it suddenly becomes that little bit more difficult.
Gee, wouldn't that be an enthralling hour?
Well, I believe on bad days he made them do 2.
Oh dear. Well, looking at...
But having said that, you will have noticed that the Brock pit stop was one of the slickest in the first round.
Yeah, I'd reckon the Freddie Gibson team would have been doing everything they could to stay with that. And looking at Alan Grice in the car 16.5, by comparison with the 17.5 for car number 7 immediately in front of them. But a lot of the cars still in the 15s, and indeed a 14.98. A 14.98 for Thomas Mazera on lap 106. So half a second, 0.44 of a second faster than Dick Johnson in the race lead. Of course, you race to both the traffic, but also to the need in the race. And there's a lot more need for Mazera to produce that sort of time than there is at the moment for Dick Johnson in car 17 on 107 laps, the race leader. 54 laps now away from race finish, with 2.8 seconds back to Jim Richards in car number 2, at 0.75 of a second, exactly 3/4 of a second, to Thomas Mazira in car 05, and another 11.33 seconds to Greg Hansford in car number 11, and only, albeit it seems a bit distant at this stage, but only to 5th place, car number 30, David Parsons, who's done a remarkable job and not been as slow in the car and as off the pace of those in front of him as I thought he might have been. David Parsons in the car that he'll hand back to the tough, fiery Alan Jones, 22.3 seconds from the race leader, 8 seconds, 7.4 in fact, from Greg Hansford in 4th place.
This is the first of the lead cars are coming in now. This is the lap that's going to all start to happen, and here they are.
So race leader in, car number 17, and suddenly becomes 3rd as M.Skaife in 2, or Richards in 2, and Mazira in 05 go by. Then Greg Hansford in 11, so 17 becomes 4th. It becomes 5th because David Parsons has gone by in 30, and it's out again and firing. So that first pit stop served them well. They're really competitive now. They're 5th at this stage. They've headed Tony Longhurst, or stayed in front of Longhurst. Will take back over from Charlie O'Brien in car 25. They're in 6th place, so they retain 5th. They're in that top 5 bunch and ready to race to the finish.
Well, indeed, as we thought, the pad change strategy for them was at the first stop. That was a very good, quick second stop, and each of the other 3 teams in contention are going to have to do a very good stop to come out in front of that.
39 seconds behind after a pit stop. In 5th place, only 39.2 seconds behind with a pit stop up their sleeve. Already you could say on that alone, they're looking the race winner.
Well, let's just watch this one through.
Yes, Mazira's been closing for a while, and there he goes. Listen to the crowd here. And both these cars must be within an ace of their stops as well. So Thomas looks as though he's going to come into the pits with a slight gap over.
Ever the thinker, Jim Richards would have been happy to let him do it, and look what happened one corner later. Mazira locked up and only just managed to keep it off that very close fence at that stop corner at the back of the track. Jim Richards would say, all right, we'll let him have a little bit of a risk. This guy's fiery. And I reckon Jim would have been delighted to see that. It happens to be at a time when it didn't matter too much for Mazira, locking a tyre, putting a little bit of a flat spot on it, but because he's so close to his pit stop. But for the risk involved, there wasn't much in it. And down in the pits, Ian Campbell with Dick Johnson.
Dick Johnson, that was a sensational session. You should have heard the crowd when they went by. You've never won this race. How did it feel?
Well, I don't know. We haven't won it yet, have we? Well, actually, I'm just very pleased. The car is absolutely superb. The guys have done a fantastic job with it, and if everything keeps going the way we're going, you know, I can't see any reason why we probably can't come out with a win.
Well, you had us all thinking when you come in for that early pad stop, that was planned?
It was certainly a planned stop. We wanted to know exactly where we were, and I think those guys did a great job in the short time that they had, and obviously the pace car helped a little bit as well. So we'll just wait and see what pans out from here.
First and second in the motor race at this stage, into the pits together, as you can see. Greg Hansford heads the motor race now in car number 11, the car that he'll hand back very shortly to Larry Perkins. So the 2 and 05 in the reverse order came into the pits together, but it's 05 that win the pit stop part of the race and comes out first, ducks in behind the Diet Coke car, and in ahead of the Coca-Cola team car. And storming by comes J.Bowe in 17, so that the race order now is Greg Hansford from Peter Brock in 05, J.Bowe in 17, M.Skaife in car 2. Coming out now, wait for confirmation as his car comes across the start-finish line, and as he goes by there, and the computer system gets the readout, it's 56.4 seconds in arrears. Now compare that with Dick Johnson's car, 17 now in the hands of J.Bowe, that came out after the pit stop, only 39 seconds behind. They're 56 seconds behind.
But what about Brock's stop there? The HRT, that must have been an enormously quick stop, because Brock's actually out in front of the shell car, literally only 10 or 20 yards, but he's in front.
What is fascinating is they seem to have pulled the move of the race so far. They haven't changed brake pads. They're going to go the whole race meeting without a brake pad change.
The race leader now, Greg Hansford, in car 11, handing over to Larry Perkins, helping him get buckled up and tight. They're fueling the car. Larry's a bit impatient, but saying, I'll look after it. Everything's sweet. And tyres going on calmly, hope not too calmly. The race leader now is Brock, 05 from J.Bowe, 17 from, still at this moment, M.Skaife hasn't gone by, so that it's 11 Larry Perkins. Where is M.Skaife in the red car, number 2? Larry Perkins, now you'll see the boy perform. And across the start-finishing line, and there is car 2 behind him in 4th place. So let's recap the race situation. 111 laps have been completed by the top 5. The race is being led by Peter Brock in car 05 by 1 1/4 seconds from J.Bowe in car 17. Watch that battle develop. 32.4 seconds to Larry Perkins in car 11. He's racing and trying to haul them back in absolutely from now. It's just a fraction of a second back to M.Skaife in car 2, and then 53 seconds from the race leader is car 30 as M.Skaife has gone through on Larry. Is car 30 in the hands of Alan Jones. But look at M.Skaife in a rush. Look out. Thomas Mazira, at least Peter Brock in car 05 and J.Bowe in car 17. And to me, one of the most telling remarks of what it takes to be a motor racing driver was J.Bowe's comment when said, well, you'll be in the last stint against M.Skaife. And he said, yeah, well, so what? Where's the big deal? I love an argument.
Well, that race is over. The Winfield team had to do a pad change then. It cost them. The Shell team got out quickly and has just gone inside Brock to take the lead. Bowe is now in front, 10 yards in front, and really these are the 2 in the race from here.
But the other interesting thing now is that there's a 32-second gap between M.Skaife and Johnson, and we've got some 50 laps to go. So he's got to make just under half a second a lap to get himself back into the race. This is really going to be well worth watching.
Isn't it ever? Boy, this is a motor race.
And as Howard correctly pointed out, both the HRT stops were very, very quick, which signifies that they didn't do a brake pad change. Now, this could well be a fairly major tactical gamble. They can't possibly have tested this, and I think they've taken a major gamble to try and win this race.
What a different sort of Sandown to other ones. The other ones have been littered by the odd driver error and mechanical problems. We've seen a couple of minor driver errors here, but basically everybody's kept going and firing and racing all the way.
And that's why this formula is really starting to work now, because these people are fully experienced on these cars. The cars are not overstressed. They're all in there. They've all done exactly what they'd said, which is to race so far.
There were 8 cars, sorry, Howard, in there. There were production cars, Danny Bogut and Murray Carter, and Sala was out on the grass in his Holden Commodore. There you can see Mark Brame in the BMW M3, and Win Percy now back in car 7 that's in 8th place. The traffic is ferocious, the pace is furious, and the race is still very open. So the Sandown 500 really is in an enthralling situation. It's 48 laps from the end of this 161 lap race. This is the situation. Look how close the fight, the motor race, the argument is, and we'll see all that's to evolve. And in fact, don't take any notice of that -1 lap to M.Skaife, Jim Richards. They're on the same lap, as is Larry Perkins, now at the wheel of car number 11, and Alan Jones at the wheel of car 30. They're all potentially in the race, but the top 3, any of them could win it, and we'll tell you more about it shortly. And this is what happened some 2 hours and 35 minutes ago. The race start for the Sandown 500, first held in 1964, and one of the early cars, and the opening lap literally to run into problems was the second Holden Racing Team car. Then Larry Perkins had done a wonderful stint early on, and handed over 7 minutes and has him with a race lead of 6.4 seconds over Peter Brock in 0.5. In third place, 33.4 seconds behind the leader is M.Skaife back at the helm of car number 2 and not making any headway against the leader. But let's go down with John Smales with Thomas Mazira.
And indeed, Will, the Brock-Mazira pit stop has got everyone stumped because the car was in the pits for just 19 seconds, fastest pit stop in the race, and of course it didn't take brake pads. Thomas, you're the only lead car that hasn't taken a brake pad change. What's your secret?
Well, I think that's good, isn't it?
It's great, but you must be, it's a huge tactical risk, isn't it?
No, it's no risk at all. We did lots of homework on that, and that's our strong side, and it's according to a plan. We're not taking any risks.
You're using a material that no one else is using?
Well, I'm not going to tell you what the secret is, and because I think it's going to help us a lot at Bathurst too.
So the car is braking properly, and you don't have a problem with the brakes?
No problem with the brakes.
Well, we hope that'll be the case towards the finish, but the man with the biggest grin on his face at the end of that stint was young Craig Lowndes. Craig, congratulations on your first stint for the HRT.
Thank you very much.
How did it feel during the race itself?
They just told me to take me time. I sort of got into a rhythm, and the car felt really good. It was very consistent. I had a few little moments there that I got back on track, and it was going very well.
Yeah, but the consistency was 1 minute 14 regularly, Craig. That's pretty good for a newcomer.
Yeah, we... in practice, I did one of those 1:14s. I was sort of hoping to get into a consistent 14, and that I've done, so I'm really happy.
How does it feel now that you're out of the car and the pressure's off you?
I'm really good.
Felt the first spots of rain falling here at Sandown, Will, so look out for potentially rain problems as we get towards the closing of the event.
Well, wouldn't that be the final bit of spice on what has been an absolutely enthralling, never boring for a moment motor race here at Sandown. Dick Johnson leading, going up by 9.4 seconds now over Peter Brock in 05, and it seems that the Brock combination, the new car from Holden Racing Team, has no answer to the combination of Dick Johnson, John Bowe and the Shell team in a car that was new, a few rounds before the end of the Touring Car Championship. It was given to John Bowe. He tested it for Lakeside, in fact. So, and here M.Skaife in number 2 in very close company with L.Perkins getting untidy. But for all the fact that they are so close to each other, they're 35, nearly 36 seconds behind the race leader, who's pulling away from them. This surely is the surprise of the race, the surprise of the expected form for the long distance. Big ones, Sandown and Bathurst, the Tooheys 1000, is that the Shell team cars, which particularly Dick Johnson's car and to a lesser extent John Bowe's, really didn't run that well in the Touring Car Championship, but come the long distance race, they have the pace seemingly of anything.
Well, indeed, that is the surprise of the day. I mean, you look back over history, and the Johnson team has never won here at the Sandown 500. It's traditionally been a race of mechanical attrition. It says so much for these new generation V8 cars that pretty well all the main contenders are running, and the race is going to be decided by the tactics, by the pit stops, by the brake pad gamble that the Brock team has taken, and if, as you say, there's possibly a shower of rain, that's probably the last thing the Johnson team would like to see at the moment.
Seeing there in 16th place, the Ayuya car, car number 44. But just to recap that Dick Johnson information, he's had pole position here 5 times, but never managed to win the race. His best second 13 years ago, 1981. He was headed for a win seemingly in 1989. Remember this as you watch the race unfold too. He's only 15 laps from the end of that, and he'd commanded that race. He had 2 pit stops then and finished the race in 5th place. Here's the G.Seton car out of sync, up to 7th place. Now this car was down in 28th at one stage, and they're back up to 7th. We watched them, they were 2 laps down. They're still, in fact, 2 laps down, so they haven't made the time on them, but they've picked up placings as others have gone out.
Yes, they have. I mean, great, as you just mentioned, they've come through very nicely, but they'll still be terribly disappointed because they're really not balanced against people back in 27th. They're judged by the people up there in the front, and it hasn't been a good race day for the Peter Jackson cars.
So, yes, Dick Johnson, 1989, only 15 laps from apparent victory. but 2 pit stops pulling him back to 5th place. He's retired from it 9 times, but has been 3rd in 82, 3rd in 88, and last year with J.Bowe and Cameron McConville, he finished in 6th place. So been some wretched times, as it's been this year for G.Seton, and now Larry Perkins is in a rush, but he's dropped to 1.3 seconds outside behind M.Skaife in car number 2.
And looking out from Larry's car there, you couldn't actually see any particular sign of drops of rain on the screen, so that report of rain may have just been a very, very light shower. And
just the odd drop, I think.
Indeed, and that comes as extraordinarily good news for the Johnson team, believe me.
What's been interesting over the past 8 to 10 laps, in fact, is the Johnson car driven by Bowe is always faster by anything from 1/10 to up to 3/10 a second from the Brock-Mazira Commodore. So the Brock-Mazira Commodore, I think, are going to be a little bit disappointed because they pulled a wonderful trick being able to get through, we think, with brakes. That should be a dominant position in winning this race, but the Johnson car has just been so fast on the day that it's out there and it's staying out there.
The first appearance in this race since 1989 for Fred Gibson and his team, only bringing 1 car where most of the other teams have run 2, but thought it was worthwhile, thought it was far enough away from Bathurst to do it, and I think thought that they were the car to beat. And in fact, car number 2 is fallen from about 33-34 seconds out to 36.9 from the race leader, is in 3rd place, is just barely shaking a little bit of a buffer back to Larry Perkins here in 4th in car 11, but certainly not getting anywhere usefully close to the leader, because not only is he not pulling the time in, but of course he's losing laps in so doing, so that he's now 36 laps from the end, and he's 36 seconds behind. From needing about half a second a lap, he now needs a second, and it ain't there. He can't do it. We did think earlier on that he might have been in with the potential at least to catch and to argue with Peter Brock, but it doesn't even appear that that might be the case, albeit that it's a different situation to Brock in 2nd place. It's a 26-second buffer.
And indeed, this is really a major reversal of form, I suppose you'd say, coming into this race. I mean, through this year, you would always say if you beat Skaife, you win the race. And clearly the Winfield team aren't the fastest car on the track this weekend. Bowe was the fastest in the dry on Friday, and that form has come through to the race. The Dunlop tyres have found the consistency that they've been lacking. This is the compound for Bathurst. It's all looking good.
Wipers on car number 2. And if indeed that's the case, then what we thought was the 3rd and final part of the race will become this will be the 3rd, but it won't be the final. There'll be a 4th, and if there's enough rain, it'll be a pit stop and break into a wet weather tyre battle, as well as another pit stop race.
Well, indeed, if it does rain hard and the lead cars have to stop, you would have to say it was a concern to the Shell team, because the Yokohama wet, which Skaife will fit, is generally seen as being the wet tyre, and this would give him and Brock on a Bridgestone wet, which is also seen as being a good wet weather tyre, some sort of a show.
The amount of rain that there is out there at the moment, however, the slick tyres they're on at the moment are very warm. There's full temperature in them. The track is not that cold, and in fact they'll stay out a long time on these slick tyres at this stage. I don't think there's going to be enough rain, and I don't think anybody will be gutsy enough with what some 35 laps to go in the race to pull unless they have to.
Oh no, it's not wet weather tyre situation yet. Larry Perkins, though, has put his wipers on now, and he's only just recently done so. There's your split time, and that's from the lead to 3rd. And it's a developing and possibly changing situation, but you put wets on to squeegee water away to get them into the ruts of the tread pattern so that the tyre can contact the track. Well, at the moment, there's not enough water on the ground to squeegee anything away. What's hitting the ground would be evaporating and sort of spreading over the little minute granular aspect of the bitumen. So, but
If this rain continues, though, the crew chiefs have one of these awful decisions to make, because it's not just simply a wet tyre decision. There's grooved slicks, there are intermediate tyres, there are wet tyres, and so if it gets to the situation of having to stop, someone there has to make a very big decision.
Yeah. It's interesting to see the times now with this weather condition changing a little bit. We've got Bowe on a 1:15.4, Brock on a 1:15.3, and Skaife on a 1:15.3 as well. So they're all doing the same time. This means that they'll all stay out there, and it's still very quick racing.
Yes, Fred Gibson said to me this morning, I don't want to make any decisions today. And as you say, this comes up to the situation that is decision time, and this is Sala. Now, we saw that car have a lose earlier today. Look at the ride height of the standard Holden Commodore. Don't for a moment think that this is in 25th place, that they have any relationship with the race cars on which they're based. Have a look at the difference. Look at the high and seemingly narrow viewpoint of the production car Commodore. Look at the lean on the body. It's going a fraction of the pace of the Falcon behind. You know, they started off in the same factory. Well, similar factories, Ford and Holden. Similar sort of cars, similar sort of $30,000 price. But by the time the race teams finished with them, they had 260 km/h special built road rockets that cost something around 100 and, well, I don't know, depends who builds them, 160,000, something like that. And they've got so many special bits on them, and they're so beautifully made, as you look at them, you could be looking at an aircraft. And indeed, they go faster than some aircraft.
Indeed, and the technology comes straight from the highest levels of aircraft technology too.
So, Sala and Swain paddling around there in their production Commodore that's well out of the production car battle, that's still being led by the BMW M3. It's still in 17th place from Gary Walden, Colin Bond in car 70, the Mazda that's in 18th place, second in that class, and Stephen Richards in the Porsche. It's in 19th. They've only picked up one place. Now, in any other year, they probably could have got into the top 10, somewhere thereabouts. They've struck the year where just about all the quick things have kept going, which means for the quick things as well, they've seen more of the production slower cars to lap than ever they wanted to dream about.
As we said earlier, this is part of the maturity of this particular set of regulations. The teams have gone through a very steep learning curve, and you look at the finishing rate this year compared to last year and the year before, and suddenly we've got the sort of racing that Australia deserves.
Minus 16 laps for the Crichton Mark Brame BMW M3 for down 17 to Walden and Colin Bond in the Mazda. Now, Alan Horsley would be disappointed for that. It's one of the first times that they haven't been, as we have a look at 13th place at this stage, Lester Smurden and Cameron McConville. McConville was in Dick Johnson's team last year. Anderson Consulting, of all unlikely companies, to and have a look at car 05, and then we'll show you how it happened. Now, this car's in second place at the moment, but quite obviously is headed to the pits at the end of this in about 2.5 kilometres time. The front end of it's copped a hell of a whack, and here's how it happened. Not enough clearance, and it just torn off on a little bit of embankment, a little bit of uneven ground there. Didn't spin, didn't hit anybody. But going so fast, and Brock with the brakes on, snugging the front down for all the lack of grip that he had out there on the grass, and not quite what we expect or very often see from Peter Brock.
Correct, and he was locked up as he came into our screen. First of all, he was locked up. He was in too quickly, had a couple of lifts of the tyre, of the brakes, back onto it, and it was just too fast. And here he is today with a lot of trouble, and it'll be interesting to see how much time this takes off him.
He didn't go into the pits, so it wasn't 2.5 kilometres away for heading from the pits. He wants to show it to the Sandown grandstand, and the fans there quite incredulous, standing up. Peter, what's happened?
You just have to hope that he hasn't damaged an oil cooler there. I'm not quite sure where they're situated on this brand new HRT car, but that's the serious concern. If that's okay, if his oil pressure's okay, he can conceivably keep going as long as it doesn't fall off in an inconvenient place.
30 laps from the end.
And will the officials allow him to continue with this? And is it dangerous? He may yet get a black flag and have to come in and tear it off and go back out again.
Well, one of the things he's done too is let the crew have a look at it, because he doesn't know how much damage has been done. He doesn't know how close to the ground it is. It's much clearer to us, the damage and the danger, than it is to Brock. But frankly, I think he'll have to do something about it. I don't think there's 30 safe laps left in that car, or the front end of that car at the moment. It'd be quite a quick stop, but it's got to be 30 seconds lost at least, which means Skaife, Richards up into second place. Could be a very close business. In fact, it'd probably see them there and Brock go back to third at least. But would car 30, Alan Jones, David Parsons, and there it is.
There's the black flag. Plus, he's actually losing 1.5 seconds a lap anyway in driving the car like this, so it was a wise thing. He has to come in.
Remembering what happened to Michael Schumacher when he didn't obey a black flag, I'd say Peter Brock would be well advised to get to the pits next lap.
Brock will stop for sure, but I think his biggest problem could be the team, because they're so proud of this shiny new car that there was a sort of dark thoughts as what might happen to the first person to put a scratch on it, and I think Pete's done a little more than scratch it.
Well, it was talked of, you know, Brock with this extra 100,000 for Bathurst if he wins his 10th Bathurst, and indeed that's what he was trying to do today to win his 10th Sandown, and there was talk of what will happen if Mazeira damages Brock's chance to win $200,000 in total. Well, here's the man. Actually, both have made a little bit of a mistake. Both have had an off, but Brock's done the most damage. And when you think of it in that term, it's pretty damn good that they're punching, and they were only 14 seconds a lap or so ago, but they're now 17 odd away from the race lead as into the pits comes P. Brock.
Did you see that back just up the road there? Brock was waving at the marshals. Oh, clearly, marshals do out on the racetrack tend to, particularly on slowdown laps, wave at you and clap and cheer, and they clearly sensed Brock was going to be in the pit shortly, where he is right now.
So keeping a close time on this. The rest of the pit crew with very little to do. A little bit of fuel in, which is a wise cover. As you can see, the parking lamp turn signal is slightly damaged, but nothing more really to do than to fit the new front spoiler, the air dam, to the front of it, and they lift off pretty well. They transport the cars, put them into the trucks with those removed.
The matter is whether the bodywork itself, the metal, is actually damaged, and whether the new part will fit to the old rearranged part.
What's the alignment like?
Here comes the magic tape. That's the answer.
The man who developed that tape to seal up air conditioning ducting in the ceiling of of modern buildings did the motor racing industry an enormous service, because it's great tape. The old people call it sometimes duct tape, but it's duct tape. And with a minute lost, Brock back out on the track. A minute lost. So Skaife in car 2 that he shared with Jim Richards is in second place. Jones and Parsons in 30 are in third. Perkins and Hansford are in fourth. Longhurst and O'Brien are in fifth. And Brock Mazeira are in sixth place now from second in car 05. So how quickly one minor error can bring them unstuck. Sixth place, Thomas Mazeira, the Czechoslovakian Peter Brock, the man from Melbourne, the local hero, the pole position holder here today, the man chasing his 10th victory, but the man there just for a moment in these rocket ship quick cars. Just the very slightest error, yet he's still, I was going to say on top of the car, that's not quite the way to do it, but he's still confident and prepared to fling it around. Indeed, he's at the point now where there's no point in hanging about. You've got to have a go at it, but down in the pits is his team manager with John Smales.
It's Jeff Gretsch, Will, and Jeff, what did the officials say to you that forced you to bring him in?
We got the black flag because the damage to the front spoiler. We were arguing that there is no danger to other traffic or our own car. Peter radioed in and said it was fine. But, you know, I mean, if they black flag us, we tried to explain to the officials that, you know, we deem the car still drivable. Peter was saying it was okay, but we had to obey the order and replace the spoiler, so that's what we've done.
He was losing about a second a lap, was he not, out there?
He lost an initial couple of seconds, but then it stabilised around about the 16-second a lap mark. So, okay, it did affect the handling slightly, but it wasn't to any great danger.
Earlier today, you unofficially protested the Alan Jones car, which was spilling fuel in front of Brock. Now the officials have come and got you on this. Do you think you've been treated fairly?
It's all a part of racing. We thought, obviously, fuel coming out of a car is a danger. The stewards didn't think that, yet damage to our front car they think is dangerous, and they black flagged us. So, you know, we're not the officials. They're the umpires, and you've got to go by their decision.
Brendan Barrett?
That's right. Thank you. Thank you.
So Jeff Grech there, copping it squarely on the jaw, as indeed he has to do. I'm sure each incident was seen as an isolated incident. In other words, whether the fuel droppage was actual, and if it was, whether it was dangerous. And what would they have done about it anyway? And in this instance, a separate thing and a lock-up from Brock there. And looking at this situation, as we look at the current placings and look how they've changed now, so that it's Falcon from Commodore, Commodore, Commodore. And the next Falcon is a fair way back in 8th, G.Seton, P.Radisich. Alan Grice, Junior Johnson there in 10th, bringing up into the privateers in 12th place. And the BMW M3 in the hands of Mark Brame being hounded and rounded up by Peter Brock.
The interesting move now is in position 3 is the Alan Jones car, which is running around about half a second or so a lap faster than the M.Skaife car. And they're close to one another, and that's the move that I think we're going to be watching next.
Coming up, in fact, been racing now for 3 hours in the Sandown 500. 137 laps completed by the race leader, D.Johnson's car number 17 in the hands of J.Bowe. Both drivers and the Shell team had done an absolutely superb job. They really have handed out to people today a lesson in, hang on a moment, don't underestimate us. Danny Bogan, though, in car number 41, the Mazda 626. A sweet car. I mean, a lovely 2.5-litre V6 engine. I think one of the prettiest medium-sized cars on the market. But here, a fairly solid car, so carrying around a fair bit of weight. And in the production car class, where even the quickest of them have had difficulty keeping up with or making any impression on this largely intact field of Group A 580-plus horsepower cars, car 1, Seton, has been off again. I honestly find it hard to believe. Look at the front spoiler. I find it hard to believe.
Well, it does seem like a lot of errors from a team that, you know, you would rank among the top 3 professionals.
Let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this.
This is when it was all over.
And boy. And that stage, Wild Times nearly completed, and just get it out without doing anything too wild over on the edge there. You saw that once he could see that he made the edge, he wasn't going to go over it any faster than he had to. But amazing. I mean, G.Seton has been one of the cleanest, tidiest, neatest, most consistent drivers for years. And this year, he's been, I suppose, by the pace and the quality of the opposition, forced Howard Marsden into a lot of error?
I think a little bit, but I think that on today he might have been doing a very good job. I think his brakes are still giving him a hard time, and I think that's what's taken him off today. So he might, in fact, have had an excellent drive considering what he had in front of him.
Yes, that's a very good comment, because that first stop where he said it just won't stop. And no, it is a very good comment, because Glenn, you wonder when he makes mistakes, and when he makes 2 on a day, and you weren't here, Chris Lambden, but when he came into the pits, he said it won't stop. The brakes are horrific.
Yes, and that generally means that there's an awful lot of pedal travel, and quite often these guys can hit the brake and it goes to the floor, and they literally have to pump it up to get brake working. And you know, if you haven't,
if they want the rest of the car, incidentally, Mr. Lambden, there's where it is. Look, absolutely dug into the ground. It just stopped there, tore it off, and went in under the car.
And it was interesting watching Radisich drive this car before. He had the more slide on the car, more back-end slide on the car, and I rather wonder if he wasn't compensating for the car not really handling and turning in properly and giving it more of a throw than maybe Glenn's used to with this sort of a car.
So, a fairly wretched day. Freddie Gibson's team, you've got to say, want more pace. The Shell team, Dick Johnson, you would say, are delighted with their pre-Bathurst form.
Look at him pumping the brake.
Yeah, so fix the brakes now, you know.
Imagine the split-second braking you have to do in these cars and then getting there to find you've got to pump it. I mean, it's an act of heroism to drive one of these cars when the brakes are that bad, I reckon.
Well, what people don't understand is that in normal driving, you leave yourself margins. Here, you're trying to leave virtually no margin and drive it up to its maximum all the time. And so something goes wrong, you've got no time to take an alternative course of action. And if you ain't got no brakes to do the retardation, then you have got a massive problem. And again, we saw that Speedo briefly, but the pace is just gigantic. And in 10th place is G.Seton, P.Radisich, as he goes out now. A 16.5 was his last flying lap time, and you have to say that's pretty damn good for a car that's whose brakes, or which brakes are suspect, to say to be as kind as possible about them. But it's another Falcon that's been doing the job, and still a 15.06 for J.Bowe on lap 140, 21 laps remaining in the Sandown 500. It's never been won by Dick Johnson or J.Bowe, but today could be the day. But it was 6 laps further on from this, with victory seemingly as assured in 1989, 5 years ago, when Dick Johnson suddenly saw the thing fall apart and came home in 5th. So I'm sure he's not yet counting his chickens.
No, that was a turbo, would you believe, came loose on the Ford Sierra that year, and literally it was only laps from home. There's still very much on for second place here, isn't it, Will? I mean, there is 4 or 5 seconds between second, third and fourth.
But on the other hand, too, the battle for 6th and 7th place. Have a look at it. Mazira and Brock's car number 05 against Bradley Jones. And in car number 15 with him, Craig Lowndes. And they're in, as I said, 6th and 7th place respectively. Both 1 lap down on the race leader. So not much to resolve here, because have a look at the bloke who's in car 05 and who's in 6th place, 1 lap ahead, 1 position ahead of the other car. And if it ever gets down to a case of which of those two finishes in front, it'll be P. Brock in 05, not Lowndes and Bradley Jones in 15.
Third place has just changed. Larry Perkins just sliced down the inside of Alan Jones going into the first corner. Clearly, a lot of action yet, Will.
Indeed. So 40, about nearly 40 seconds behind the leading pair is that Larry Perkins and Alan Jones pairing, cars 11 and 30 respectively. Here we see them. 3rd place now, a podium place at the moment for Larry Perkins. And unlike Dick Johnson, J.Bowe, Perkins has won here in the past. He won here in 1984 with Peter Brock after being 4th on the grid, and he won in 1992 with Steve Harrington, retired last year after being on pole position, but then of course went on to win Bathurst.
Interestingly, Perkins looks to be the fastest car on the track at the moment, and he is running the same Dunlop compound tyre as race leader J.Bowe. Now clearly these tyres are coming on better and better as we go into the race, and you wouldn't take a bet against Larry catching M.Skaife.
That's right. I think the Johnson car, of course, Johnson-Bowe car, is now starting to understand that the race is coming towards the end. They've got a 40-second break, and they'll be taking it just a little bit more easily than the rest of the cars.
And if you say that Larry Perkins is likely to catch M.Skaife, and it's definitely possible, I think, what about Alan Jones?
Doesn't give up, does he?
Oh, give up. He doesn't know how to spell the word. No way. I really find that a very exciting sound when you hear these cars and you really get in them and you get good audio and you can hear all that's going on. It really is fantastic. So there's the battle for third and fourth place, and 47.86 seconds from the race leader is Larry Perkins, but 43.67 from the race leader is M.Skaife, so it's 4.2 seconds, 4.19 to be very accurate, forward from Larry Perkins in third place to M.Skaife in car number 2 in second place. And, of course, Alan Jones, there's Skaife going out of picture in the foreground there. Here's his pursuers, Larry Perkins, Alan Jones, cars 11 and 30, respectively. And this is a great race. I think Johnson's got it covered with J.Bowe if nothing goes wrong. With that sort of margin, I don't think I know that he's got it covered if nothing goes wrong. But have a look at this battle. Second, at the moment, M.Skaife, but pursuing and knowing exactly what's on is Larry Perkins in car 11, the Castrol car, and then 30, Alan Jones. This is a real fight. .97 across the finishing line, another .9 to Alan Jones, so 3.97, less than 4 seconds now forward from Larry Perkins in third place to M.Skaife in second, and .91 of a second back to Alan Jones, so 4.817, well, 4.9 seconds over the three cars arguing over second, third and fourth place in the Sandown 500. There's Larry Perkins, the lead man, Greg Hansford, the tall, blonde, Queensland type, very talented guy who's done a marvellous job for Larry Perkins. Seeing off the Falcon tyres Mazda. That's water on the screen. Very genuinely, 145 laps now, 16 remaining. It'll have to fall. A lot of rain would have to come down very quickly to force anybody into the pits at this stage. They're now at the stage where they've got to endure just about, unless it's absolutely torrential, to endure anything that might come from the skies. 4.12, so Skaife's responded, and 2.64 to Alan Jones. So suddenly, and Alan Jones leaning on the Anderson Consulting car.
I think it was the other way round, actually.
Yes, Perkins took 3 or 4 tenths of a second out of Skaife for a couple of laps in a row there, but as you said, Will, Skaife responded on that lap and pulled another 4 tenths of that back. So clearly he's got the message from his crew that Larry was making a small inroad, so I think he's got him covered.
Potential mistake time. Larry's made mistakes in these sorts of situations at Sandown.
They've all made mistakes in these situations, Will. It's as you say, 3 hours and 10 minutes since they started, and you start to get a bit tired and emotional at this stage if you're not entirely concentrated on what you're doing.
Alan Jones suddenly has lost ground to this pair, and one hastens to say not interested, but seemingly not able to do anything about it. He's given it his best and finds he can't do anything with it. He's now within 15 laps of the finish. Better to ensure that he gets there.
Either that, or he has had a couple of problems getting through on back markers, and you'll find lap by lap one of them gets a break over the other, but certainly Larry's up and charging. I think he's got a fresher car possibly than the Falcon, and he's looking well. And I think the Skaife has decided he's in for second place, and he'll protect against Larry.
And 43.6 second lead to Dick Johnson, J.Bowe. A quite remarkable and distinguished effort here in the Sandown 500. Really is. Both drivers have done a superlative job. The team's obviously done a fantastic job. And I think as we look at 44 there in the kidney litter, and at that time of day when nobody tries to do anything about it,
It's the IU Conway VL Commodore. Here he goes. Just a brake lock up and off backwards there. Their highlight of the weekend, I'd have to say, was they were very, very luckily out at just the right moment in wet qualifying and actually qualified very well for the age of the car. But it's over for today.
Indeed. They won't be removed from there, and there'll be no pace car laps either. And this car has been driven by both drivers into a formidable lead, a lead that'll have every other team and driver thinking,
well, exactly.
What do we do? I mean, this is a serious defeat for everybody at the hands of Dick Johnson, John Bowe, irrespective of whether they finally get to the line now. To have this sort of pace, to pull out this sort of gap, as I say, makes people rethink Bathurst in a quite serious way, I suspect.
Well, they've got the package right, and that's what it's all about. They've got the package right. Dunlop have done a lot of work, as you referred to earlier, and they've got this M9 compound. It has worked without a shadow of a doubt here today. As John Bowe himself said, towards the end of his stint, he's doing competitive times. Now, that's all important in this formula, is tyre durability. Now, they've got it for perhaps the first time for a while, and this does change the Bathurst pre-race betting, if you like.
Yes, it'll be interesting. It's been a cool day today. Hasn't put a lot of temperature into the tyres, but Dunlop has certainly had the tyre on the day. Bathurst is generally not quite as strict on tyres as is this Sandown race, so but it's not just the tyre side of the business, it's the driving, it's the car, it's the whole chassis business. This is a very quick car, and we all expected the new Brock car to be the car to really dominate as a product, but in fact Dickie Johnson's done a super job today.
Porsche 968 just hooking in towards the pit area ahead of the big booming field, including the race leader, but down in the pits, and they're just coming by him is John Smales.
And Alan Jones is limping up the back straight. He put his hand out as he went past the start-finish line and slowed right down appreciably. David Parsons, what's the problem?
Well, I don't really know. It could be a gearbox, could be a flat tyre, it could be, it's obviously something he's on his way in now, so whether that's where he came in contact with the other car there, who knows, but a bit disappointing, but that's motor racing.
Well, let's see what happens. Thanks, David.
He's into the pits. The pace car is out, and I want to know why the pace car is out.
Well, that IU car is in a rather dangerous spot in that gravel trap, and you couldn't argue with the logic of the pace car, but of course this now changes the whole complexion of the race. These guys are going to start off nose to tail with how many laps to go? About 12? That's going to be a 12-lap sprint.
Yes, at the completion of the next lap behind the pace car, where John Bowe now is in car number 17. And G.Seton in, and he's still in 10th place. And again, it's a reflection on the enormous reliability in this race, unexpected at Sandown, of the other cars, that none of the production cars have got as close as they expected to get, but that G.Seton too, there's quite a gap behind him, that he's retained 10th place despite his various problems.
All right, here's the big push here where they can change the front spoiler and get back out before the pace car comes through. It's a smart move if they get away with it. The pace car's halfway up the back straight. They should get it through, so good pit management to pull the car in at this stage.
Pretty clever too to have matching, colour matching race tape, duct tape.
Although the field will form up behind the pace car, the good news for John Bowe is that there is about 10 cars between him, 10 lapped cars between him and M.Skaife further back in the queue, but Skaife now has Larry Perkins almost attached to his rear bumper. So I would tend to suggest there could be a lot of activity in that area when the race gets underway again.
And that'll be a beauty for added pressure, added incentive, and the potential for problems. So, as you say, a car that certainly was sitting in a vulnerable position. I thought they might have lived with it to the race end, not wanting to upset this well-earned Shell team Dick Johnson, John Bowe lead. But no, as 30 is wheeled away out of 7th place. And of course, out of a much higher place than that, not so very long ago, but 7th at this moment, goes the Alan Jones car, number 30, with David Parsons. And one has to say, not only did Alan Jones do a superb job in the car, but so too did David Parsons. I've always been a fan of his, but I thought, gee, you know, how could he be so quick? This time he'll be off the pace. And he was not far off the pace at all. And he mixed with the number 2 drivers very, very competitively indeed. As we have a look at Jan Lammers in car number 8, the Triple M Volvo 850 Ti. It's in 21st place outright that he's sharing with Kent Youlden. And as we come by, it's D.Johnson, J.Bowe ahead of the Mazda. And then the new car for Crick and the Coca-Cola car and the Falcon Mazda. And the second Holden Racing Team car, the second Shell Team car. So a long way back, as you say, to M.Skaife with Larry Perkins hot on his tail. Second and third place in the race. How many cars did you count them, Chris Lambden?
Roughly 10, I thought. And whilst Bowe's lost his lead, the good news is that when we come out for what will probably be a 10-lap sprint to the finish, he'll have a completely clear track in front of him. He won't have back markets to contend with, so I don't think he'll be panicking at this stage.
No.
But, the action's going to be between Skaife and Perkins.
And there's the Kent Youlden at the helm of the Volvo at the moment, car number 8. Yeah, the Jan Lammers, 58 kilos. Gosh, it's lucky it's not blowing here today. We'd have to attach a brick to him. John Smales down in the pits.
And I'm with Alan Jones, who's unfortunately just put the 4th place Falcon away. Alan, what was wrong?
It was making a very strange noise at the back from the dip area, like rattling around, and you know, we really want to keep the car for Bathurst, and going over the top of the back straight there, you don't really want anything to let go at the back, so discretion was the better part of valour.
Want to keep the driver for Bathurst too, eh?
Well, that's even more preferable, yeah.
Shame after putting in such a good effort today.
Oh, yeah, but that's the way it goes, isn't it, I suppose? You've got to be there at the end. It doesn't matter how good you look at the beginning.
Ultimately, they've learned something for Bathurst.
Well, we always learn something. You can never stop learning in this game, but this is what this race is all about. Put it into good stead for Bathurst, and if we've learned something, well, it's a step in the right direction.
There's a pace car out at the moment. There's 10 laps remaining. It's going to be a real race to the finish.
Yeah, it's going to be good stuff. It's just starting to drizzle with rain, so the punter should be wrapped in this.
You'd be upset you're not out there with it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it'd be good. 10 laps to go, a bit greasy, it'd be a bit of fun.
Yeah, like a Chinese kitchen. But it will be an interesting finale to what has been a beaut motor race. I agree with you, Chris Lambden, that J.Bowe is pretty safe, except for the greasy conditions. Aha, towing something backwards out of a sand trap like that. The wheel were on full lock when it was parked, so they got the wheels back onto straight ahead, but it's fairly well dug in.
Yeah, they need a winch or a snatch'em strap to get it out from there. The trouble is that they continue to fiddle about like this for too long. The tyres on the race cars are going to get cold, and then they go into greasy conditions, and that can be a bit of a problem to the blokes on the first few corners until they get a feel of the new conditions with the colder tyres.
There are, in fact, 9 cars between the race leader and second place, M.Skaife in car 2, and then car 11 behind him, Larry Perkins. As you can see now, they're doing exactly what you're saying, Howard Marsden, trying to keep heat into the tyres in what is an absolutely critical time, because the run to the finish, but also the worst possible conditions, getting later, colder in the day, and on top of that, some grease. Looking in Jan Lammer's Volvo there was rain falling fairly consistently. There were drops constantly coming onto the screen. And that sort of thing is not fun, but nobody can afford, barring an absolute deluge, nobody can afford to contemplate going into the pits to change to wets. And still not enough rain there to do it at the moment. So here are the cars that are retired from the race. Have a look at them. Wayne Gardner, Neil Crompton. It slammed the fence sideways. And then a couple of laps later to Brett Youlden in that old VL with a tail shaft problem. P.Morris, another fence slammer in the car sharing with G.Brabham. And then lap 56 for Blythman and Renshaw. We don't know what caused their problem, but Brett Youlden, they went straight ahead. That's right, it was a crash. Oil pressure problem on lap 34 for them, and differential problems for Alan Jones, David Parsons, playing it wisely. They don't want the chance of something breaking and throwing them off into the scenery. So that's the situation in what has been a surprisingly mechanically trouble-free race, in a race that's traditionally very hard on drivelines and transmissions, because at Bathurst you normally go through a flowing corner, run it down a straight, then get onto your brakes and come down through the gears and gun it through the corner again. Here there are a lot of corners, succession of slow corners, where you run it up in a gear and you lift off when you're doing almost maximum revs, backloading on the engine and on the transmission, and then you do it again and again in quite a number of corners. Have a look at any of the slow little complex areas And now the pace car light goes off. 151 laps have been done, 10 remain, and with 9 remaining, in one lap time, we'll be racing again. And the final, and I suspect enthralling moments of the Sandown 500, with the thing that caused the problem still there. And while I was going along with you, Chris, it didn't, well, it did achieve something. It always achieves something, I suppose, but anyway, it's taken some racing out of the race, but I suppose it's put some other racing back into it, taken a few laps away from us, but it'll certainly get them close together, and it'll be fairly heart-stopping stuff, I suspect, for viewers and for us, but particularly for the people remaining out there in the cars.
The start will be very critical. The stewards before this race made it very clear to the drivers the procedure at these restarts. In the old days, they had to retain station until they reached the start-finish line. Now, as soon as they get the green, they can go. So I think you might see L.Perkins perhaps trying to get a bit of a run at M.Skaife up to the first corner.
L.Perkins, the leader is the one in control of the situation. D.Johnson says he gets a green light, he can go or not go, but nobody can go by him. The Mazda there, incidentally, tucked in behind, they've come up to 16th place, the best production car in the race, and the Mazda is in 17th place, still being led by the BMW M3 there. But they're coming round now, and as soon as the green light goes, and I'm sure J.Bowe rockets away in car 17, everybody else can go too, because they will get green flags from the flag marshals. So watch it as they come round to the straight here, and watch that situation. Car 2 in 2nd place, car 11 in 3rd place, as they fight for glory in the Sandown 500. Here they go, and here comes J.Bowe in car number 17, and he hoiks off to a very nice lead indeed. But the one that we're really interested in is further back, and it's M.Skaife and L.Perkins. Already got 2 cars buffered between him, but Larry covers them as they go down under brakes and gets it behind M.Skaife. And look at the traffic everywhere. The Falcon tyres RX-7 getting out of the way. And second across the line was this car number 7, Winfield, Russell Ingall's car, the second car from the Coca-Cola team, in 7th place at this stage. But have a look back here. M.Skaife, Perkins. That's the battle for second. 18 in there with them is in 8th place. You want to be clear of that, L.Perkins. You don't want that shell car in there. You've got it. And that was not what Larry needed or wanted, or indeed deserved. Goodness me, did he hit him?
Everybody hit everybody.
Gosh, that was close. And the conditions just slippery enough that you can't take risks that you sometimes would otherwise take.
Great camera work there just to swivel and get the in and out of that particular passing movement. Perkins
got 2 cars going into that one corner then. It was a huge I've got to get there kind of move, and it came off. And he's now right back with M.Skaife.
Enthralling.
7 laps.
2 top drivers. A young gun, there in car number 2, specialist driver, loves testing, works at it for everywhere. The engineer who's been up in Formula 1, who builds cars, gets as much satisfaction out of building them and sorting them as he does out of driving them, and who in his late 40s is still a top driver, but as well as that, a top developer and builder of cars and of engines and so on. What will I run at Bathurst, in what configuration? I ain't telling nobody. L.Perkins, LP. He's built mileage marathon cars, he's built solar cars. And the argument is still not over. A great individualist, and if he believes something, fervently honest about it and prepared to say it. He thought that the Brock bonus for Bathurst was wrong, and he was the first person to speak out about it, and he was soon joined by Fred Gibson, the team manager of that Winfield car number 2, and there's been a lot of condemnation that the ARDC, which still hasn't posted actually the details of that prize arrangement, and it has to be approved in the sub-regs, and there's been a lot of other people saying, how can you offer one person extra money over the rest of us and spend $10,000 in doing it. If he wants to organise it privately, or if somebody privately wants to do it, that's fine, but how can the organiser do it? And a lot of dissension about it. And Larry, typical of his honesty and thought, was the first person to speak out about it. Have a look at the damaged front of car number 2, the Skaife car.
Skaife's in a very difficult position here. These are fast-back markers that he's having to get through, with Perkins looming in the mirror.
And all of a sudden, Larry's right there now on the rear of Skaife's car. They're coming up to a slower car, lapping the second of the Coke cars. This is where Larry will look for an opportunity, if some exists, to slide down the inside.
It's interesting, neither of them getting up on the car ahead of them, and Larry's move possibly would be trying to squeeze Mark into the wrong side of the car that he's trying to pass himself.
Well, the action speaks for itself here. And so does Larry Perkins' actions in car number 11. I mean, this is the race. 5 laps from the end, 4.5 laps from the end for second place. It's the Australian Touring Car Champion for 1994 in car number 2, who's heading Larry Perkins at the moment. But it's Larry Perkins not far from his Moorabbin engineering base, out after him. And boy, when they got onto the back straight, didn't M.Skaife pull some ground and slot car 7 between them?
I think Larry must have missed a gear or something to get that far behind on that back straight. But Larry's very determined, isn't he? He's not taking any prisoners on this one.
You can almost see body language in Larry's car when he's in this frame of mind. There's no a little bit of the subtlety goes out the window, and there's a lot of very positive movements of the steering wheel.
Meanwhile, the Bowe-driven Johnson car has already taken some 4 seconds out of the second and third battle, so certainly Bowe's in control of this event with about another 4 laps left to go.
Well, while all this is going on, we've got some more motorsport action for you here on SBS, because there's not only the Formula Ford race to come, but this race is finishing unexpectedly early. So Nigel Mansell's IndyCar year, 1994, which was to commence on SBS next Saturday, September 10 at 4 o'clock, 3:30 in South Australia, will start today. So at 5 o'clock today, half an hour of an 11-part series. Nigel Mansell's IndyCar 1994. The man, of course, who, as this battle goes on for second and third, and there you see the 2 cars from the viewpoint of Larry Perkins' car 11 in third place at the moment, looming up all the time onto M.Skaife. Skaife held up. Larry biffs the Volvo, and Larry's recovers and gets going again. And for a moment there, it looked as though M.Skaife had lost in that encounter, and M.Skaife came out on top in that encounter. 2.14 seconds between them. A damaged front to the Castrol car.
Has it taken the radiator out? That's the thing that will be really worrying Larry now.
And when you talk of 80 kilometres an hour difference between the various cars, you saw the impact speed there, what, 20 k's, I suppose?
Yeah, you'd say at least that, looking at the state of Larry's bonnet.
Yeah.
But looking back at that, I think he almost tried almost a little bit of a gamble there. He was trying to angle that car back on the inside of the Volvo, whereas Skaife tried the outside, and it just didn't quite work.
Yeah, Larry's had 3 brave moves, and the third one didn't work.
But anyway, just to go back and to finish that, the business about Nigel Mansell, the first man, of course, to win an IndyCar series on top of a Formula One World Driving Championship, and the only man, of course, so to do this year, and the car 7 that caused Larry a little bit of hold-up and a little bit of inconvenience only a little while ago. The car looks healthy at this stage. not aesthetically, but functionally it does. And we'll get another gap. It was 2.14. As they come by this time, it's 2.48. Larry might have done his best.
And there's only 2 laps to go, of course, Will, so really, at this stage, I think Larry will just be hoping that there's nothing mechanically wrong in there, and third is going to be his best.
The rimless glasses that have always been on the end of that rather thick bridged nose. And the man that won Bathurst last year and gave Greg Hansford a Bathurst double, a win in October and a win at Easter, in a production car and in a Group A Commodore, has thrown his best at it, and at the moment looks like giving best to M.Skaife in car 2.
And interestingly, Larry's car, his older car, which won Bathurst for him last year, has now got to the front of what we'd call the privateer race. Privateer is now running in 10th spot, the Trimboley-Harrington car, and that is Larry Perkins' old Bathurst winner.
We've been looking at the top 3. Of course, Dick Johnson with a lead that's, we've neglected to tell you, 7 seconds now over M.Skaife, Larry Perkins, who sorts out a problem there too. And G.Brabham looking as though he's got that BMW scything along very, very well indeed. He looked to get onto the straight pretty smartly there as we get another break on Larry Perkins, 2.56, and 160 laps completed. The final 3.1 kilometres started by Dick Johnson as car number 17 with J.Bowe at the wheel. Not so very far from victory now. Gee, for a moment I just imagined it seemed to be going slowly, as it did in 1989 when Dick was 15 laps from the end and seeming certain victory. But what a resounding high-speed effort this has been today. 15th grid position, punched through to the lead in the opening segment of the race. A long stop, punched back, drove back, raced back to the lead in the second segment. Then did it again in the third, and indeed did such a good pit stop that it was almost guaranteed as they pulled out of the pits with a very small loss of time. Fourth place and only 39 seconds down with 1 lap remaining. No corners remaining now for J.Bowe as he storms towards the finish in car number 17, the Shell FAI Falcon. Contrary to all the expected form and predictions, victorious in the Sandown 500 for 1994. And an outstandingly good job, a really superb job done by the team and by both drivers. J.Bowe at the wheel now as he was in the first stint, the team owner, and the car's lead driver, Dick Johnson, in the middle stint in what has been a spectacular race and his first victory here ever. And in fact, he first competed here back in 1977. This is the first time he's got there first, and he's with Ian Campbell.
Congratulations. The Melbourne Hoodoo's gone. You've won the Sandown 500.
Yeah, at last. I tell you, it's been a long time coming, but I'm very pleased. I just hope that we can hold this form all the way, you know, into Bathurst and certainly after that, because the car's been fabulous. The guys have done a great job. It's just been a very good package for us.
The talk all up and down pit row is the speed of the car. Is this a message to everybody else?
Well, I hope so. You know, we've been working very hard with the car since the end of the championship, and obviously we've found a few things which will make us look fairly good at Bathurst, and I'm very, very pleased.
Dick Johnson will be going straight down to pit lane, down to victory lane, I should say, to join a very elated J.Bowe.
Yes, hello. So, a great performance by J.Bowe, particularly doing 2 stints in the car, but Dick Johnson, the man, saying, you take the first one, boy. You're the one that's got to pull it forward from 15th grid position in what was, we always said, very aberrant grid positions in a very short 20-minute qualifying session, where first out got best track conditions and last out got the wettest and slipperiest by a long way. And it was that sort of factor that ended up with the Johnson team car down in 15th grid position. But boy, oh boy, how they've recovered from it to this extent. There are the official results on the Sandown 500 on our superb scoring system. A race time of 3 hours, 34 minutes, 14.42 seconds, run at a spectacularly fast and very reliable pace. Victory to Dick Johnson for the first time ever. He's been trying since 77. Back for the first time since 89, the Winfield racing team, M.Skaife, Jim Richards, and then further down, 6th to 10th place, Peter Brock, Thomas Mazera, and Alan Grice, Steve Johnson in the second Johnson team car, a Richard Day for Peter Jackson, and then the privateer, Daily Planet Racing, Trimble and Harrington in 10th place. We'll be back to Sandown shortly. concentration down at the start-finish line at the end of this superb Sandown 500. It really was an enthralling motor race, which in the typical tradition of the race remained a cliffhanger right to the end, that battle with L.Perkins chasing M.Skaife, and then, of course, thumping his car up the tail end of the production Volvo car just before the end of the race and having two fearful laps, Howard Marston, wondering if the cooling system was damaged and whether he could get to the finish of the race that he's won a couple of times in 1984 with Brock and then a little bit later in his own team car. But that cut and thrust for second place nearly came off, as you say. He gambled, didn't he, on just... It's worth the risk here, trying to get down the Volvo, and all he saw was a big rear end.
Exactly. He had two very brave moves. He got away with them. That was really nobody's fault. The Volvo tried to do the right thing, and poor old Larry just picked it up.
But Howard Marsden, how do you see it in terms of the coming race, the Tooheys 1000 at Bathurst, but also in terms of this one, because we've seen reliability such as we've rarely seen before, and very close racing as well.
Yes, what we've got is the reliability of the cars, and we've got the results coming up for you now.
Look how close they are, the first four.
And that's what you're going to see, I think, at Bathurst all the way through. One car's going to be dominant, I'm sure of that, but even up to the position of 6.
Further back, though there's big gaps building in the first four very close together, but big back gaps building up further back, and some teams like G.Seton's really would be very worried, I think, about the pace of the car that dominated this race, the Dick Johnson team car that J.Bowe and Dick Johnson used so well. But you see they're running through all, and we've got the earlier production cars further ahead of that, so that of the 29 cars in the race, that's the situation as to how they all finished up. Wayne Garden and Neil Crompton, the ones that had real problems. But now, down on the grid and enjoying the fruits of victory is John Smales with the presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a sensational Sandown 500. Would you please give a huge welcome to the men who came third in the race today, L.Perkins and Greg Hansford in the Castrol Commodore. To present them with their trophy, John Davidson, the promoter of Sandown International Raceway.
Thank you very much. Fantastic effort, Larry. Won here in '92. Nearly won the race last year until I think he broke a valve spring. And of course, Greg Hansford, they both won Bathurst last year. What a fantastic 500. Gentlemen, your beautiful trophies for the 500. Well done.
LP, step in here. There was no beating that Falcon today, though, was there?
No, thanks, everyone. No, there's no way. I congratulate John and Dick. They did a superb job, but really, my Castrol Commodore also did a superb job, especially under the hands of Greg Hansford. You know, he doesn't have the luxury of racing all year, and he absolutely mixed it and caught the best in his stint. And again, my crew who did a superb job to give me the car, and obviously my old Dunlop's absolute faith in him again.
LP, when they pulled that pace car out with 10 laps to go, you thought you were in with a chance?
Well, I certainly thought I might have been in a chance with young M.Skaife there, and we certainly were going 11 tenths, and I went 11 tenths into the back of the Valiant there at one stage, and you know, dashed, threw me chances away, but it was a top race, and it's probably the hardest race I've ever had for 500k.
L.Perkins, folks, sensational stuff. Second place in the event today went to two men who've won it here before. 1994 rather, Australian touring car champion M.Skaife, and with him Jim Richards.
Thank you very much, fellas. Hey, fellas, Sandown crowds don't boo. We congratulate great champions, but we don't boo them. Fellas, your trophies for finish second in a magnificent race. Mark, national champion, married this year. Jim, your boy went on and won the Formula 4 championship, drove in the same race. Must be a great Father's Day. What about it for M.Skaife and Jim Richards?
And Mark, when that pace car came out towards the end, what did you think? Did you think that there was a chance that you were going to catch Bowie?
Well, I knew there was a fair few cars between us, and there was another yellow car in between us also, so I thought they might make it a little bit tough. But no, it was a great race. I think it's the best long-distance race in terms of the quality of the racing that I've ever been in. And congratulations to Larry and Greg, and especially to John and Dick for the effort they put in. They went very, very well, and the yellow cars today were, you know, the class act. To our team, to Jimmy and all the rest of our guys for the effort they put in, and to Winfield, Yokohama, Ansett, and to all the rest of our sponsors, thank you very much.
M.Skaife, folks, and Jim Richards, congratulations. Well, there's a man who's raced here 15 times in the Sandown 500. He's failed to finish on 9 occasions. He's never won this race. Please, a Sandown welcome for Dick Johnson and J.Bowe. And there was a man in 1965 who raced here and won the Australian Touring Car Championship in a Ford Mustang. His name was Norm Beachy. To present Dick with his trophy, it's a day for Fords.
Congratulations, Dick, and I'm so pleased for you because it's been a while that you got at the home here, and for you and Shell and J.Bowe, I think it's been a fine day for motor racing. Congratulations to the pair of you. Thanks very much.
Dick, when did you know you had it won?
Actually, when John drove across the finish line, that's when you have these sort of races won. It's been an absolutely fantastic race. The car we had today was superb. It really was. It's a real credit to the guys. They worked very, very hard after the championship to get the car to the speed it's got now. And I just sincerely hope that we can carry that speed through to Bathurst. And to Shell and FAI and Dunlop, who supplied some fantastic tyres for us today. Everything was very, very consistent. The car was, as I said, excellent. And John, well, he did the lion's share of the work. I was just there stroking it around in the middle. And now that we've got the monkey off our back, we'll be back to Sandown for a lot more wins. Thanks.
J.Bowe, you've got to come here and say a few words. Bowie, just how strong was that car that Dick gave you today?
John, as I said to you during the telecast, it was the best racing touring car I've ever driven in my whole life. And to Ross Stone, Jimmy Stone and all the guys that work at DJR, my heartfelt thanks. It was just superb. And as Dick said, the tyres were just tremendously consistent all day. And I think we'll give Bathurst a shake. Was it also the best, the cleanest long-distance race you've been in for quite some time? Because to us, watching you, that's the way it appeared. Well, it was just a great race. There wasn't any nastiness on the track. The slower traffic was pretty good. And, you know, it's a great event, and I hope it continues forever.
What did you think when it started to rain?
Mild panic.
Yeah?
Mild panic.
And what did you think when they brought out that pace car 10 laps from the end and the lead you'd been working on was whittled away?
Well, it's a bit of a concern, but it happened to Jimmy and Skaife earlier in the race as well. So, you know, that's one of the don't knows about endurance racing, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
J.Bowe, Dick Johnson, congratulations. John Davison has the champagne.
OK, gentlemen, put your trophies down. Pick up your bottles of champagne and spray the crowd.
Well, great jubilation as ever at the end of a motor race, particularly this one, though, for Dick Johnson and J.Bowe, because that took a long time for them to earn. And what I think Howard Marsden would make them particularly pleased about it is the fact that they have the pace, seemingly, of everybody else at this stage, and they're 4 weeks away from the big one.
They were totally dominant in everything, and they were lucky. They picked up about 40 seconds off that first pit stop. They didn't work quite so well, but they would still have won even without that. Most impressive day.
So which teams would be worried, and why, and what's to be done?
Well, certainly the other major Falcon team has got a problem to sort out, and that's the G.Seton team. The Johnson people are looking very good indeed, and the Commodore teams, both the M.Skaife grouping and the Brock grouping, really must be very worried, because Dickie loves Bathurst.
And it's a circuit where tyres aren't so sensitive and brakes aren't so sensitive, so it's a slightly different factor. You can't take the specific form of this as translating immediately to Bathurst. It's a different sort of race, but nevertheless, that Shell team pace was really mighty impressive. For the production car teams that thought that they were going to get into something, perhaps even at the tail of the top 10. It was victory to Neville Crichton, Mark Brame, 15th position only, over a rarely defeated Mazda RX-7 of Gary Walden, Colin Bond. But a fascinating prospect. Those cars, of course, are not in Bathurst. A fascinating prospect for the full field it'll take to the track there in early October in 4 weeks' time. Thanks for joining us here today at Sandown. Now, back down to John Smales.
Thank you.
The Sandown 500, the Sandown 500 is, of course, the start of the long-distance touring car racing in Australia. Bathurst in 3 weeks' time, the Tooheys 1000. But for SBS viewers, of course, it's the start of a summer-long of motorsport, because in 5 weeks' time, we'll be bringing you Thunderdome racing from Calder Park, the first of 7 races to be held this summer. And that's a sport that's fast gaining public attention. We hope you've enjoyed the Sandown 500 today. It's been a sensational motor race. John Davidson and his crew here should be very much congratulated for the work that they've done in bringing this race to fruition. It certainly proved, apart from anything else, just how good these touring car racers, touring car drivers and the teams are here. I personally have never been to a motor race that has had so few attrition, so few cars pulling off smoking and falling to pieces. To me, it has been the start of a new era of Australian long-distance motor racing, and it bodes well for the 1,000 kilometres of Bathurst, that you'll be able to go there and from start to finish see these teams racing at record speeds against each other without any concern, well, without much concern at all, of them starting to fall apart. To me, that's been the big plus for today. As I say, I hope you've enjoyed racing here at the Sandown 500 from the Sandown International Motor Race. On behalf of Will Hagan, Howard Marsden, Ian Campbell in the pits, I'm John Smales for SBS Sport.
In a world beyond control, caught in the headlights, coming after you. When I woke up this morning, I had to do what I gotta do. Let's reach a heaven.